Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales. Chapter 56-27. As Kang Xinmu and Emoya hurried on their way, they came across the tomb of General Leng Changhong near the outskirts of the ancient Desolation City. The tomb was severely damaged. Other than the epitaph, there was nothing else. The epitaph roughly described Leng Changhong's life. Leng Changhong was a general of the ancient martial country. He fought on countless battlefields and was never defeated. He was known as the undefeated god of war. However, during a battle with the enemy country, the 10,000 Gu country, he disappeared without a trace. Because of Leng Changhong's mysterious disappearance, the ancient martial country lost and faced the threat of annihilation. As for where Leng Changhong went, there were no detailed records. The reason why the tomb was turned upside down was probably because someone wanted to know if the person buried here was Leng Changhong. As for the truth, Kang Xinmu and Emoya did not know, so they did not stay for long. But now, they saw Leng Changhong's subordinates in this ancient Desolation City. Could it be that Leng Changhong was in this ancient city? Kang Xinmu, do you remember the 10,000 Gu country mentioned on the epitaph? Emoya thought for a moment and asked. I remember. The name, 10,000 Gu country, evoked some of Kang Xinmu's memories. A long time ago, he had heard of the 10,000 Gu country. This was a country where the cultivation of venomous insects was prevalent. Every cultivator used venomous insects as their foundation. Later on, for some reason, he rarely heard of the 10,000 Gu country. But these were just stories that Kang Xinmu had heard by chance. It had been a long time since then. I heard that Leng Changhong later appeared in the 10,000 Gu country. After that, the 10,000 Gu country was annihilated for no reason. Some people said that Leng Changhong used all his strength to perish together with the 10,000 Gu country. Emoya said gently. About this saying, it's not without reason. Later on, until now, there are no cultivation techniques related to the 10,000 Gu country. It's just that there are many doubts about Leng Changhong. Calculating the time, it has been tens of thousands of years since General Leng Changhong existed, right? The environment in which Kang Xinmu grew up, as well as the cultivation technique he cultivated, was destined to have nothing to do with Leng Changhong. Even though he was once a famous general, Kang Xinmu knew very little about him. But objectively speaking, tens of thousands of years had passed since Leng Changhong had become a military general. To him, life and death was a luxury. Actually, I have dabbled in a type of cultivation technique of the 10,000 Gu country, and I also know that General Leng Changhong is indeed gone. Emoya's expression was unusually serious. The fact that General Leng Changhong had passed away sounded completely normal. However, the strangest thing was that General Leng Changhong's subordinates had appeared in the ancient desolate city. Senior Emoya, do you think that General Leng Changhong is the city lord of this ancient desolate city? Kang Xinmu suddenly had an idea and asked. Perhaps. Emoya did not deny it, nor did she directly acknowledge it. Of course, Kang Xinmu was just guessing. Time passed. There were still cultivators rushing over from behind. 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. At the entrance of the ancient desolate city, many cultivators once again gathered. When they saw the path in front of Kang Xinmu and Emoya, they cast doubtful glances at the two. It was not an exaggeration to say that the cultivators who could come to the arcane sealed realm were all at least level 8 or higher, and were all powerhouses. With so many powerhouses gathered together, the scene was definitely one where no one was willing to submit. There were people who refused to submit to Kang Xinmu and Emoya, so they walked past them and walked towards the path that the crowd had opened. Regarding this, Kang Xinmu and Emoya did not say much, and chose to wait and see. The one who walked into the path was an old man in a linen robe. The old man held a jade walking stick in his hand. Its luster was bright, and it formed a sharp contrast with his grey robe. It's Taoist Shou Yang. Isn't it just a broken ancient city? How did it attract Taoist Shou Yang here? Whether this is a broken ancient city or not, everyone here knows. Kang Xinmu had heard of Taoist Shou Yang, who the crowd was talking about. His origin was unknown, but he belonged to the ancient Phoenix clan. As the name suggested, the ancient Phoenix clan was dominated by phoenixes. There were very few Taoists among them. Putting aside the cultivation method, Taoist Shou Yang and the ancient Phoenix clan had nothing to do with each other, and there was no way to link them together. Putting aside the ancient Phoenix clan behind him, Taoist Shou Yang himself was very strong. His unpredictable supreme mental cultivation method caused people to tremble in fear upon hearing its name. As soon as Taoist Shou Yang appeared, the crowd, who had been silent for a long time, began to talk again. The voices grew louder and louder, causing the atmosphere that had just quieted down to become noisy again. Taoist Shou Yang ignored the crowd's discussion. He walked towards the city gate along the path that had been opened. Kang Xinmu noticed that Taoist Shou Yang suddenly sped up when he was close to the city gate. When he smoothly reached the city gate, Taoist Shou Yang paused for a moment. He paused for only a breath's time before he strode into the city gate. As for why he paused and what he did during that short pause, no one knew. Many cultivators present knew about the strangeness of the ancient desolate city, and they were all waiting for Taoist Shou Yang to return. Unexpectedly, Taoist Shou Yang walked into the city. Everyone saw him talking to a soldier in the city. What's going on? Can we enter the city now? I thought everything in the ancient desolate city was an illusion. The scene caused a huge uproar. Two young men imitated Taoist Shou Yang and came to the path. After taking a few steps, Kang Xinmu noticed something strange in the path. The path was covered with dense black cracks. If one did not look carefully, they would not notice it and would only think that it was a special feature of the ancient city. The cracks covered every inch of the path, and each crack was made up of even finer lines. Jiang Shenwu narrowed his eyes, and very quickly, he saw those fragmented objects. They were actually earthen yellow insects. There were so many of them that they formed a common crack when they gathered together. What made Kang Xinmu's scalp go numb was that these insects were still alive. When he saw them clearly, he saw that they were wriggling. Kang Xinmu was truly shocked. Just like Kang Xinmu, Moya was also examining the path. She did not have the 7 devouring demon sealing art, and her eyes were only ordinary eyes. However, she could rely on her own power to examine the strangeness of the path. Before long, she also discovered the existence of the earthen yellow insects, and she could not help but frown. The two young men who followed Taoist Shou Yang into the path also smoothly entered the city gate. However, the moment the two of them stepped through the city gate, their figures disappeared. Inside the city, Taoist Shou Yang seemed to sense something. He suddenly turned and glanced outside the city. Chapter 56-28. Taoist Shou Yang seemed to have seen something he shouldn't have. His pupils constricted, and his expression turned grave. After pausing for a moment, he quickly left. Taoist Shou Yang's departure did not affect the order in the ancient desolate city. The pedestrians were still busy, and the soldiers were still patrolling the streets. Everything was as it had been before. However, everyone present had seen the two youths enter the city gate with their own eyes. The atmosphere outside the city gate grew heavy due to the two's mysterious disappearance. Kang Xinmu's gaze was still fixed on the crack in the passage. In just the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the color of the crack seemed to have deepened. Everyone here is a cultivator who has stepped into the supreme level, and you all deserve the title of powerhouse. I don't understand why you're still gathered here. Suddenly, a clear voice rang out. Judging from his attire, he was an elder of the Talisman Water tribe. This person swept the crowd with a disdainful gaze, and when his gaze landed on Kang Xinmu, it was full of disdain. It's understandable that you're gathered here because you can't enter before. But now that Taoist Xiaoyang has entered the city, what are you afraid of? As he spoke, his gaze lingered on Kang Xinmu for a moment. Since you're so brave, you can go in. Soon, someone else followed up. As soon as one person spoke, more people followed suit. In short, they wanted this courageous elder of the Talisman Water tribe to enter the city. In truth, this elder had already planned to enter the city, but he was dissatisfied with Shui Mo's actions and felt that the elder was too cowardly. Elder Shui Qinghan had been brutally murdered by Kang Xinmu, but Shui Mo was actually indifferent about it. It was one thing for Shui Mo to make such a decision, but the other members of the Talisman Water tribe did the same. He said that he would wait and see, but it was just an excuse for his fear. It's not up to you to decide whether I want to enter the city or not. The elder of the Talisman Water race glanced at the rowdy crowd in disdain, then glanced at the ancient desolate city. In the next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared. In that instant, Kang Xinmu clearly saw the space around the Talisman clan elder distort. Immediately after, Kang Xinmu felt the space behind him being torn apart. But soon, the torn space closed up again. When the space closed up, a dark light flashed. The unknown light flickered for a moment and then disappeared. If it weren't for Kang Xinmu staring at this space, he probably wouldn't have noticed the existence of this strange light. What was certain was that it was this streak of light that had suddenly appeared that had prevented the Fu Shui tribe elder from using his spatial spell technique. This strange dark light should be the strange thing about the ancient desolate ancient city. Just like the sword Qi from the demon god clan. A moment ago, Kang Xinmu had sensed the presence of the sword Qi, but in the next moment, the sword Qi had mysteriously disappeared. At that time, Kang Xinmu didn't think too much about it. But now, he finally understood. Kang Xinmu noticed the uniqueness of the ancient desolate ancient city, but he didn't do anything. Moya understood Kang Xinmu, so she also stood quietly by Kang Xinmu's side. Seeing that Kang Xinmu and Moya were indifferent, Shui Mo wasn't surprised at all. Instead, she looked at the Talisman clan elder, who had just spoken, with dissatisfaction. At this time, the Talisman clan elder, who had tried to sneak attack Kang Xinmu, felt complicated. What was wrong with this Kang Xinmu? How could he block his spatial spell technique? As someone who was proud of his spatial spell technique, he definitely wouldn't believe it. After making some adjustments, he once again used his spatial spell technique. No matter how many times he tried, the result was the same. He couldn't use his spatial spell technique to get close to Kang Xinmu. Not only that, even when he used his martial technique, he couldn't affect Kang Xinmu in the slightest. From start to finish, Kang Xinmu just stood there calmly and didn't show any signs of making a move. The Talisman clan elder thought of the strangeness of the ancient desolate ancient city, so he didn't try to attack Kang Xinmu anymore. With a wave of his robe, he strode towards the city gate. However, before he could even take a step, he disappeared. In front of everyone's eyes, he disappeared. Not a single trace was left behind, and even the space didn't distort. The moment he took a step forward, he disappeared from where he stood without a sound. If not for everyone's gazes on him, they wouldn't believe that such a living person disappeared just like that. The sudden disappearance of the Talisman clan elder caused the atmosphere to become heavy again. The cultivators who could come here weren't ordinary people. Some people were discussing, and some people noticed something strange. From the moment they arrived at the ancient desolate ancient city until now, they could be considered to have witnessed the strangeness of the ancient desolate ancient city. What was certain was that if one wanted to enter the ancient desolate ancient city, they had to go through the city gate. Moreover, they had to go through the passage at the city gate. This was something that Taoist Xiaoyang had personally demonstrated. However, something had happened to the Talisman clan elder just now. Some observant people realized that he had disappeared after stepping into the range of the passage. The strangeness of the desolate ancient city was this passage. Just now, they had also been standing at the position of the passage, and there was nothing wrong with it. Since Kong Shinmu and Emoya had arrived, there had been unknown cracks on the passage. What puzzled them the most was that, the cultivators who were closer to the city gate, the ones who had given way to Kong Shinmu and Emoya just now, were not acting on their own accord. Instead, they had suddenly given an order. That mysterious voice flashed by, but it had an irresistible majesty to it. Therefore, this group of people focused their attention on Kong Shinmu and Emoya. They really wanted to know who these two people were for them to be so imposing. Of course, this was something that Kong Shinmu and Emoya didn't know. Kong Shinmu's attention had always been on the cracks. When the Talisman clan elder had disappeared, the cracks had increased. If one looked closely, they would see traces of blood energy flashing through the cracks. It was the blood of the Talisman clan elder. The Talisman clan elder hadn't disappeared, but had been eaten alive by those mysterious little bugs. In less than a breath's time, they had devoured a living person. When Kong Shinmu was looking at the passage, he caught a glimpse of the situation inside the city. When he saw a pedestrian in the city, his pupils constricted. Within the city, among the patrolling troops, there was a person whose face was exactly the same as the face of the Talisman clan elder who had disappeared. However, he was wearing the uniform of Leng Changhong subordinates. Kong Shinmu. Emoya's gentle voice rang in Kong Shinmu's ears. Senior Emoya, you saw it too, right? What's going on? Kong Shinmu was extremely shocked. Chapter 56-29. Could it be that the patrolling troops in the city aren't humans? Emoya stared at the person who had the same face as the elder of the Fu Shui tribe among the patrolling troops in the ancient desolate city and made this guess. Senior, do you think they're all puppets? Kong Shinmu rubbed his chin and thought seriously. For example, the heart-devouring centipede? The two weren't unfamiliar with the term heart-devouring blood centipede. In order to not be controlled by Kong Shinmu, Elder Ao Tong of the demon god race gave up his consciousness and became a heart-devouring blood centipede. When the heart-devouring blood centipede was mentioned, Kong Shinmu looked around. He still didn't see the tall figure in the crowd. He didn't know where the heart-devouring blood centipede was trapped. It's very likely, Emoya said gently. Senior, look over there. Kong Shinmu glanced at the passage at the city gate. As the two spoke, the cracks on the passage deepened. Those cracks seemed to be a type of goo worm. Emoya glanced at the passage in front of her. The cracks all over the passage had changed slightly. She couldn't help but think of the scene just now. When the two of them approached the entrance of the ancient desolate city, the crowd finally made way for them. Was it because of that person? But soon, Emoya denied it. It couldn't be that person. That person wouldn't come here for a fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Then, why did these people make way just now? Goo worm, Emoya's words were like enlightenment, and Jiang Shenwu was suddenly enlightened. If those yellow bugs were goo worms, then everything could be explained. There was indeed a type of goo worm that liked to eat human flesh and blood. After the goo worm ate the people that were eaten would become puppets? If that was the case, then General Leng Changhong's troops might all be puppets. Not only that, maybe all the people in the ancient desolate city were puppets. Kong Shinmu focused his mind, wanting to use the power of the 7 devouring devil sealing art to clearly see where these man-eating parasites had come from, how they had spawned, and why they had only gathered at this passage. Kong Shinmu quietly activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art. The moment it opened, Kong Shinmu could clearly see that the number of goo worms in the passageway suddenly increased. It was no exaggeration to say that their numbers had increased exponentially. At the same time, the people near the passage all took a few steps back. This scene was exactly the same as when he and Emoya had arrived at the city gate. In Kang Shinmu's mind, a distant and faintly discernible voice suddenly rang out. This is, Emoya also heard the same sound. However, what Emoya heard was the same as what everyone else heard after taking a few steps back. With an irresistible commanding tone, he asked them to leave the city gate. What Kang Shinmu heard was different from what they heard. Kid, that's not something you deserve. It was an arrogant voice filled with disdain. Ever since Kang Shinmu started cultivating, he had heard a lot of such threatening words. He directly ignored it. A pair of dark eyes continued to stare at the densely packed goo worms in the passageway. Just now, he had deactivated the 7 devouring devil sealing art, and the goo worms no longer increased. Then, Kang Shinmu quietly activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art's inscription again. As expected, the number of goo worms suddenly increased. That's right, the goo worms here were definitely related to his 7 devouring devil sealing art. Wait a minute. Kang Shinmu quickly discovered that there was something strange about these goo worms. At the start, there were too few goo worms. Even with Kang Shinmu's 7 devouring devil sealing art, he could not clearly see the situation of the goo worms. But now, as the number of goo worms increased, Kang Shinmu could see it clearly. Above these goo worms, there was a small black dot. Each of the goo worms carried it. To uncover the true identity of these black dots, Kang Shinmu activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art. Those black dots were the symbols recorded in the 7 devouring devil sealing art. These mysterious man-eating goo worms definitely existed to protect the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art in the ancient desolate ancient city. The true identity of the mysterious man-eating goo worms was exposed by Kang Shinmu, and at the same time, Kang Shinmu was in trouble. Just now, he activated the 7 devouring devil sealing art and placed himself in the passageway. He could feel the densely packed goo worms crawling up his body and eating away at his flesh and blood. Kang Shinmu. Emoya's jade-like hand held onto Kang Shinmu's arm. Senior, Junior is fine. Kang Shinmu had pitch-black dragon scales on his body, so he was not afraid of the man-eating goo worms. The man-eating goo worms tried to bite Kang Shinmu's pitch-black dragon scales, but after a while, they were still unable to bite through the pitch-black dragon scales. Senior, are you alright? Kang Shinmu hurriedly checked on Emoya's situation. I'm fine. Emoya said gently. Emoya's body was surrounded by a layer of faint white halo. It was Emoya's holy power. Those goo worms seemed to be afraid of the holy power, and did not dare to approach Emoya. Kang Shinmu heaved a sigh of relief. He brought Emoya along and stepped on the goo worms as he rushed into the city. The moment he stepped into the city, Kang Shinmu felt the 7 devouring devil sealing art's inscription light up. His soul consciousness had a connection with a certain place in this ancient city. Senior Emoya, follow me. The only thing that could resonate with the 7 devouring devil sealing art was the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art. Following this feeling, he would definitely be able to find the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art. Alright. Emoya replied gently. Just as she took a step forward, she seemed to have sensed something, and she turned her head to the right. Strange, I clearly sensed that person's aura, but why is it gone now? After entering ancient desolate ancient city, Emoya had a strong feeling that that person had definitely entered ancient desolate ancient city. With that person's personality, he would definitely not come for the remnant 7 devouring devil sealing art. Then, what was his motive for coming to ancient desolate ancient city? After Kang Shinmu and Emoya entered ancient desolate ancient city, all the cultivators present were in an uproar. Just a moment ago, the Fu Shui tribe's elder had mysteriously disappeared, and right after, Kang Shinmu and Emoya had actually entered the city unscathed. Shui Mo glanced at the passageway before looking at Kang Shinmu who was in the city. His eyes were filled with greed as he stared at Kang Shinmu's figure. As expected, Kang Shinmu's unique treasure could deal with the goo worms on the passageway. While the goo worms were suppressed by Kang Shinmu, Shui Mo led the Fu Shui tribe's clansmen into desolate ancient city. Aoe only wanted to take revenge for Ao Tong, so he had followed Kang Shinmu all the way to desolate ancient city. He had very little knowledge of desolate ancient city. He could only vaguely feel that there was something strange at the entrance of desolate ancient city, but he did not know that it was caused by goo worms. At this moment, seeing that the Fu Shui tribe had led their clansmen into desolate ancient city, they also led the demon god clan in. Subsequently, the cultivators that had gathered here entered desolate ancient city one after another. Only a few cultivators remained indifferent, as though they were waiting for something. Chapter 56:30. In the crowd, someone noticed a young man in a navy blue gown. It was a middle-aged man in a white gown with short silver hair. Grasshopper? The silver-haired middle-aged man sized up the young man and spoke unhurriedly. What? You're also interested in the seal? This weird tone made Grasshopper extremely unhappy. While speaking, the silver-haired middle-aged man had already arrived in front of Grasshopper. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but he happened to stand where Grasshopper was looking at. Or, are you interested in the 7 devouring demon sealing art? The silver-haired middle-aged man glanced at where Grasshopper was looking at, then looked at Grasshopper and laughed mockingly. Shut up. Grasshopper didn't even look at the silver-haired middle-aged man. She withdrew her gaze, threw him a sentence, then turned around and left. He might still be alive. Are you sure you don't want to enter the city? Seeing Grasshopper turn around and leave, the silver-haired middle-aged man asked. Grasshopper's footsteps paused slightly. Seeing Grasshopper stop, the silver-haired middle-aged man revealed a mocking smile. The next moment, Grasshopper's figure disappeared on the spot. Gu Tianzi, if you have the time to pay attention to others, think about whether you can leave the secret domain alive. An indifferent voice came from the space not far away, falling into the silver-haired middle-aged man's ears. Grasshopper. Gu Tianzi's face instantly darkened. He stamped his foot, and the passageway at the entrance of the ancient desolate city suddenly collapsed. In a few breaths, the entrance of the ancient desolate city returned to normal. The news of the 7 devouring demon sealing arts fragment in the ancient desolate city was not a secret to the cultivators who entered the secret domain. More and more cultivators rushed to the ancient desolate city. They didn't see the scene of cultivators gathering, nor did they see the passageway, nor did they see Gu Tianzi and Grasshopper. They only saw the entrance of the ancient desolate city open, then stride in. The passageway was destroyed by Gu Tianzi, which meant that the goo worms on the passageway were also destroyed. In this way, it was a good thing for the cultivators who were rushing over later. Just like that, the cultivators who came later successfully entered the ancient desolate city. Kang Shinmu and Moya were the third batch of cultivators to enter the ancient ancient city. After entering the ancient desolate city, the subtle feeling in Kang Shinmu's heart deepened. It was as if something was calling out to him. At the same time, the 7 devouring demon sealing art was automatically activated. Kang Shinmu, I feel that those goo insects should have been affected by your 7 devouring demon sealing art. That's why they appeared. Ever since Moya came in, she had been paying attention to all the abnormalities in the ancient city. She didn't expect that Kang Shinmu, who was standing beside her, was the one with the most obvious abnormality. It was unknown whether it was because the 7 devouring devil sealing art had been activated or something else, but Kang Shinmu's eyes were suddenly tainted by a burst of black qi, and his eyes suddenly turned black and red. Senior, you're right. Those goo worms were indeed affected by the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Kang Shinmu also felt a stinging pain in his eyes from time to time. He squinted his eyes and felt a little better before opening them. When he saw the street in front of him, Kang Xinmu was stunned. Moya's aura was heavy, and she was constantly paying attention to the surroundings. The number of people on the street was far more than what he saw at the city gate. There were also patrolling troops. Batches after batches passed by, repeatedly crossing the street. Moya was a little distracted as she observed the surroundings, and she almost bumped into a passerby. Kang Xinmu's eyes and hands were sharp, and he hurriedly pulled Moya back. Kang Xinmu. That person. Moya, who was pulled back to Kang Xinmu's side, seemed to have sensed something, and she glanced at the passerby. That person's aura isn't right. Moya's beautiful eyes slightly narrowed, and a white halo flashed in her eyes. Senior Moya, be careful. With the 7 devouring demon sealing art, Kang Xinmu naturally saw the person who almost bumped into Moya. It wasn't a person. Of course, it wasn't a puppet either. It was a bug. Not just that person, but the entire street in front of him, every passerby, were all goo bugs. It's a goo bug? Moya suddenly realized. That's right, it's a goo bug. As they spoke, another patrolling troop passed by the two. Kang Xinmu glanced at them, and found that everyone in this patrol troop was a dried corpse, but they all had the aura of a living person. He could confirm that these people were all heart-devouring blood centipedes. All the heart-devouring blood centipedes' power was concentrated at the location of their hearts. If he didn't look, he wouldn't know, but looking closely, even Kang Xinmu sucked in a breath of cold air. The hearts of these heart-devouring blood centipedes were all alive. Senior Moya, the hearts of these heart-devouring blood centipedes are all still alive. Kang Xinmu truthfully told Moya what he saw. In other words, these people are General Leng Changhong subordinates? Moya's expression froze, and she made a bold guess. Can we understand that when the ancient martial kingdom and the 10,000 Gu kingdom were fighting, due to some accidents, the ancient martial kingdom was defeated? In order to protect Leng Zhanghong, the ancient martial kingdom announced that Leng Zhanghong had gone missing. General Leng Changhong went to the 10,000 Gu country, and destroyed the 10,000 Gu country with his own strength, and used the 10,000 Gu country's secret technique to resurrect all his dead subordinates. Then, it was the troop that we see now. Moya said gently. Yes, it should be like this. Kang Xinmu agreed with Moya's words. Probably only the 10,000 Gu country's Gu bug secret technique could allow the troops to achieve the goal of eternal life. Not only Leng Changhong's troops, but even the entire ancient desolate city was preserved. Perhaps there was a certain flaw in the Gu bug secret technique that caused the pedestrians in the ancient desolate city to die. The bodies of these dead pedestrians were transformed from Gu worms. Only the patrolling troops, with their hearts still alive, could act like normal people. Senior Moya, do you know what kind of secret technique this is? Kang Xinmu had no clue about the Gu bug secret technique that could protect the heart. The only thing he knew was the heart-devouring blood centipede's formation. It was the first time he had seen a secret technique that could preserve the heart for 10,000 years. This. I haven't thought of it yet. Moya gently shook her head. Kang Xinmu's eyes stared at the patrolling troops passing by. He could clearly see their hearts beating rhythmically, and each beat emitted the aura of a living person. No. These people's hearts were beating at the same rhythm. Moreover, the direction of their aura seemed to be, Senior Moya, lower your voice. Kang Xinmu didn't have time to say anything. He grabbed Moya, jumped, and landed on the roof. As soon as the two of them soared, they saw the troops suddenly arrive at their previous position. Chapter 56:31. Several swords missed, the patrol team paused for a moment. After not finding the target, they continued to patrol along the original route. There was a detail worth pondering. When the patrol team attacked Kong Shinmu, their heartbeat rhythm changed. Everyone's heartbeat was different. When they returned to the patrol route, their heartbeat rhythm returned to the same rhythm. Right now, the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Arts inscription was deactivated. Kong Shinmu could no longer see the patrol team's heartbeat. However, he could still see that all the pedestrians on the street were goo worms. They looked left and right at the passers-by, and with a glance, they saw that the passerby, who had almost bumped into them, was actually staring straight at them. Kong Shinmu, these pedestrians are not simple. Moya's gaze also landed on the pedestrians. The holy power repelled these pedestrians. Without the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art, Kong Shinmu's vision was not as good as before. Of course, he could still see ordinary goo worms and puppets, including the pedestrian, who was staring at them. For some reason, the goo worms on that person kept moving around his body. Then, that person suddenly disappeared. Kong Shinmu was slightly surprised. This person was formed from goo worms. There was no possibility of him being devoured by goo worms. Then, how did this person disappear? Kong Shinmu had not completely grasped the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Arts inscription. After the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art fused into his eyes, he could only use the power of his eyes and the additional power of the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art. He could not open the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Arts inscription as he wished. After the inscription closed, Kong Shinmu could not open it now. After trying for a while, he still could not open the inscription. This must be related to the grade of the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Arts inscription. After all, it was only the power of law formed from the fusion of the 2 supreme god powers of the 1,000-winged serpent clan elder. It was not pure power of law. After absorbing this power of law, the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Arts inscription could barely stabilize one realm. When the seal closed, Kong Shinmu's eyes looked the same as usual. If the mark of the 7 Devouring Devil Sealing Art was opened, the mark of the 7 Devouring Devil Sealing Art would appear in Kong Shinmu's eyes. Only a very small part of the engraving. But every time the 7 Devouring Devil Sealing Art was activated, a phantom image would flash by. Kong Shinmu roughly knew what the complete inscription of the 7 Devouring Devil Sealing Art was. It was an ancient rune. For the time being, he did not know what it meant. Kong Shinmu and Moya were standing on high ground, so they could see very far. On the street not far away, pedestrians came and went. Unlike the pedestrians here, the pedestrians on the street not far away looked normal. Kong Shinmu also saw some familiar faces. He was none other than the Talisman clan elder who had followed Daoist Shou Yongin. That person had already been devoured by the man-eating goo. What appeared in the city now was naturally a puppet formed by the goo. But what surprised Kong Shinmu was, while he was sizing up the Talisman clan elder, that person suddenly raised his head and looked in his direction. Kong Shinmu clearly saw a cold glint flash across his eyes. Was he still alive? In the blink of an eye, the Talisman clan elder continued walking forward like the pedestrians earlier. It was as if nothing had happened just now. With Kong Shinmu's current abilities, he naturally could not have been mistaken. Kong Shinmu looked in the direction that the Talisman clan elder had left and saw many pedestrians also walking in that direction. Among them were many cultivators who had entered the city later. Over there, Kong Shinmu looked in a farther direction. He could only see a dense crowd. They were all moving toward the city center. Kong Shinmu, should we go take a look? Moya suddenly asked. Senior, I have a feeling that something is wrong over there. Kong Shinmu could not put his finger on what was wrong, but he just felt that something was amiss. Ever since he had entered the city, he had a strange feeling in his heart. It was probably the connection between the fragments of the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art. But the connection between the fragments and the pedestrians, and the cultivators were heading in the opposite direction. Perhaps there is an answer to the mystery of the ancient city over there, Amoya said gently. All right. Kang Xinmu weighed his options and decided to do as Senior Amoya said. The connection between him and the fragment was very weak. He could only vaguely sense a direction, but it did not mean that the fragment was in that direction. The two of them flew in the direction where the crowd was gathered. But before they could take a few steps, they were suddenly stopped by a patrol team that appeared in front of them. What kind of patrol team is patrolling the rooftops? Kang Xinmu was very puzzled. Kang Xinmu, don't just stand there, Amoya gently reminded Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu responded. Seeing the patrol team charging toward them, he hurriedly moved away. At this time, the rooftops were filled with the figures of the patrol team. Moreover, the patrol team seemed to have a purpose. Clearly, they were coming for the two of them. Senior, I don't think we can go through the roof. Let's go down first. Kang Xinmu patted the air a few times, knocking down the soldiers blocking the way. Then, he and Amoya jumped down together. As soon as their feet touched the ground, a figure suddenly pounced on them. Jiang Shenwu decisively threw out a punch, sending the person who was charging at him flying. Looking at his clothes, he was the pedestrian who had almost bumped into Amoya. After that, pedestrian fell to the ground, his body suddenly exploded and disappeared. No, no. Suddenly, the deep voice of an old man rang out. Daoist Shou Yang walked over from the side. Kang Xinmu and Amoya hadn't seen Daoist Shou Yang for a while, but the latter's temperament had undergone a huge change. When he was the first to enter the ancient desolation city, he gave off a frivolous air. Every move he made showed his disdain for the passageway leading to the ancient desolation city. But now, Daoist Shou Yang seemed to have aged a lot in an instant, and he had become much steadier. His voice, in particular, seemed to have weathered the vicissitudes of life. Senior. Kang Xinmu cupped his fists toward Daoist Shou Yang. Amoya nodded at Daoist Shou Yang. Young man, leave the city as soon as possible. Daoist Shou Yang's gaze fell on Kang Xinmu. After staring at Kang Xinmu for a long while, he slowly spoke. Kang Xinmu didn't understand what Daoist Shou Yang meant. Without saying anything else, Daoist Shou Yang turned and left. Senior, I don't know what you mean by that. Kang Xinmu pursed his lips and asked. Chapter 56-32. Kang Xinmu was taken aback by Daoist Shou Yang's sudden words. Kang Xinmu's pupils constricted as he stared at Daoist Shou Yang in front of him. A smile suddenly emerged on Daoist Shou Yang's wrinkled old face. In Kang Xinmu's eyes, the smile was somewhat strange. Daoist Shou Yang smiled meaningfully, then his gaze suddenly fell on Kang Xinmu's eyes. A dark gleam flashed across them. Kang Xinmu's eyes were different from before, so he could clearly see what the dark gleam that flashed across Daoist Shou Yang's eyes was. It was an extremely obscure black mist. When he sensed the black mist, the subtle connection between Kang Xinmu and the seven devouring demon sealing art emerged once again. He was puzzled. Could it be that Daoist Shou Yang had already obtained the fragment of the seven devouring demon sealing art that existed in the primordial antiquity city? Don't overthink it, boy. I didn't obtain the fragment. As if he had seen through Kang Xinmu's thoughts, Daoist Shou Yang withdrew his gaze and said in a hoarse voice. Kang Xinmu did not know whether he should believe Daoist Shou Yang's words. Given Daoist Shou Yang's qualifications and abilities, there was no need for him to lie to a junior. However, he clearly sensed the subtle connection between him and the fragment just now. I advise you to stop searching for the seven devouring demon sealing art and leave this ancient city as soon as possible, Daoist Shou Yang added. Kang Xinmu was even more confused. Senior, it is no longer a secret that there is a fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art in the primordial antiquity city. More and more cultivators will come for it. Kang Xinmu's words made his attitude clear. Daoist Shou Yang naturally understood. Kang Xinmu, do you know that my original goal was the 10 Directions Devil Seal? Daoist Shou Yang suddenly said. Kang Xinmu was not surprised at all. Not to mention Daoist Shou Yang, even if the demon god Talisman Water Clan told him the same thing, he would believe it. After all, he had already revealed the Extreme 10-Directional Devil Seal in the previous battle. The Extreme 10-Directional Devil Seal was a sacred item of heaven and earth. Obtaining such an artifact would greatly benefit one's cultivation. I originally thought that a cultivator with a heaven and earth saint grade would have half a foot in the gate of laws. I never expected you to be so weak. While saying that, Daoist Shou Yang turned around and walked toward an empty alley. I had originally planned to slowly take you down after entering the city, but I didn't expect the 7 devouring demon sealing art to be. Daoist Shou Yang's voice grew softer and softer. The person was clearly not far in front of them, but his voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Kang Xinmu hesitated for a moment before he also took a step forward. But before his feet could touch the ground, he saw Daoist Shou Yang's figure suddenly disappear. Even when Daoist Shou Yang disappeared, Kang Xinmu did not hear his last words. Is the 7 devouring demon sealing art? What? Kang Xinmu was puzzled. What was Daoist Shou Yang trying to say? Suddenly, Kang Xinmu saw a wisp of black smoke flash past the spot where Daoist Shou Yang had disappeared. Kang Xinmu dashed to the spot where the wisp of black smoke had appeared and reached out to grab it. A bone-piercing cold suddenly assaulted him, entering his meridians through his palm and spreading throughout his body. Just as it was about to enter Kang Xinmu's sea of consciousness, the supreme divine flame suddenly spread out and expelled the cold aura. Jiang Shenwu opened his palm. His palm was empty. There was nothing there at all. Not even a trace of black smoke was left behind. Moya walked over at that moment. She bent down slightly and touched the spot where Daoist Shou Yang had been standing with her slender hand. This seems to be a secret art of the 10,000 Gu Kingdom. She stared at the wisps of black smoke in her hand. Only then did Kang Xinmu notice that the ground was full of the black smoke. However, the black gas only remained for a short while before disappearing completely. Moya thought for a moment and said gently, "It seems to be the 10,000 Gu art. The method used to refine the heart-devouring blood centipede is the one passed down from the 10,000 Gu Kingdom and later adapted by the later generations." She looked up at Kang Xinmu and said, "Part of it comes from the 10,000 Gu art. Senior, I told you that the heart-devouring blood centipede is not a good thing," Kang Xinmu said righteously. Moya looked at Kang Xinmu, who had suddenly become serious, and chuckled with her hand covering her mouth. Daoist Shou Yang's last words had become a mystery. Just like how he had suddenly fallen into such dire straits, there was no answer. Given Daoist Shou Yang's cultivation, he had probably stepped into the gate of laws. However, after entering the ancient desolation ancient city, he was no longer in high spirits. His entire temperament changed, and his entire body exuded an aura of death. In the end, he did not survive. This ancient desolation ancient city was not a simple puppet city. "Senior Moya, let's go out first." Kang Xinmu weighed the pros and cons for a long time, but he still felt that there was no need to risk his life. With his current strength, it would be difficult for him to deal with some of the cultivators in the city, let alone an unknown existence that could defeat Daoist Shou Yang. More importantly, Senior Moya was here, so he could not be impulsive. Okay. Moya approved of Kang Xinmu's decision. She admitted that Kang Xinmu was talented and had devouring power, so it would not be a problem for him to deal with the cultivators who had entered the ancient desolation ancient city. However, the ancient desolation ancient city was full of mysteries. For every cultivator, the path of cultivation was never smooth sailing. It could be said that they were risking their lives to cultivate. If they risked their lives, then cultivation would lose its meaning. In the end, Kong Xinmu and Emoya chose to leave the ancient desolation ancient city. The two followed the route they came from and arrived at the city gate. However, they found that the gate was closed, and no cultivators entered the city. The two walked around the city wall, but they did not find an exit. Not only that, but even the entrance of the city had disappeared during this trip. The entire ancient desolation ancient city was surrounded by a wall. Are the two of you also here for the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art? Seeing Kong Xinmu and Emoya lingering at the city gate, someone could not help but ask curiously. Kong Xinmu did not say anything. Although Kong Xinmu did not answer, the cultivators present were well aware of it. Anyone who entered the ancient desolation ancient city was here for the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. The fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art is about to appear, so the ancient desolation ancient city will naturally be closed. Someone in the crowd said. Oh, right. The ancient desolation ancient city only has an entrance, no exit. After saying that, that person left in a hurry. No exit? Then how do we leave? A surprised voice suddenly sounded in the crowd, indicating that not everyone knew that the ancient desolation ancient city did not have an exit. The cultivators who had gathered here suddenly fell into chaos. You want to leave the ancient desolation ancient city? Wait until we see the city lord, then we will naturally know. Chapter 56-33. Kong Xinmu looked over, but he couldn't find the person who spoke. The man casually tossed out these words, causing the surrounding atmosphere to change once again. All the cultivators who heard these words had different expressions and reactions. For a moment, the topic of the cultivators gathered nearby was the city lord of the ancient desolation ancient city. Regardless of whether the ancient desolation ancient city had a city lord or not, Kong Xinmu and Emoya couldn't leave the ancient desolation ancient city now. The two of them thought for a moment and chose to follow the cultivators to observe the situation. When I came here, I never heard of any city lord of the ancient desolation ancient city. Didn't you notice that the bustling scene in the city is very strange? Along the way, Kong Xinmu and Emoya could hear the cultivators beside them talking to each other. I saw it long ago. These pedestrians are all puppets, and there aren't many living people in the patrolling troops. Even if there are, they are most likely heart-devouring blood centipedes. The one who spoke was a red-haired young man with a spear on his back. The red-haired young man was standing on a roof at the side. After he was stopped by the patrolling troops on the roof, he jumped off the roof. He flicked his bangs and revealed his white teeth. He said confidently, "You are all supreme cultivators, and all of you have supreme divine power level 8 or above. How can you not see the details?" What he said was right, but his tone was more or less arrogant, which made some of the cultivators unhappy. "Kid, aren't your words a little too absolute? You can't see the abnormality, but we can naturally see it. Please don't generalize." Someone immediately refuted the red-haired young man. The red-haired young man didn't care about these people's aggressive words and continued to stride forward. When he passed by Kong Xinmu and Emoya, he stopped for a moment. "You are that Jiang. Jiang something from the Dragon God clan." The red-haired young man's tone was as disdainful as it could be. His provocation of Kong Xinmu also made some of the cultivators stop. Jiang Xinwu had massacred the demon god race, the talisman water race, the thousand-winged snake race, and many other prominent races, including the elders of the demon god race, talisman water race, and thousand-winged snake race. It could be said that most of the cultivators who came to the ancient desolate ancient city this time were here for Kong Xinmu. However, the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art had yet to appear, so no one took action. As for the red-haired youth, it was a human youth called Tang Xiaoyu. No one knew where he came from or where he was going. They knew very little about Tang Xiaoyu, but Tang Xiaoyu was not someone who knew his place. Wherever there was chaos, there would be him. He could always appear in all kinds of secret realms at the right time. As a matter of fact, Tang Xiaoyu came when the sealed mystery land appeared. Tang Xiaoyu was arrogant, and he had offended many famous sects and families. In a way, the degree of his hatred was much higher than that of Kong Xinmu. After all, Tang Xiaoyu even dared to offend the dragon god race, where Kong Xinmu was from. From his current words, it could be seen that he did not take Kong Xinmu seriously at all. Although Kong Xinmu had just entered the Supreme Superior state not long ago, and judging from his posture, the supreme divine power that he had mastered was not strong, he was able to come to the desolate ancient city. Tang Xiaoyu's move was undoubtedly to offend all the cultivators who entered the desolate ancient city. Tang Xiaoyu, how dare you appear here? Tang Xiaoyu's appearance instantly attracted the attention of many people, and his enemies came looking for him. Let's see where you can run this time. As long as there was a common enemy, it was an alliance. Many cultivators who did not know each other initially gathered together and rushed towards Tang Xiaoyu, forming an encirclement. Facing this situation, Tang Xiaoyu did not take it to heart at all. He tapped his head with one hand leisurely, and his eyeballs kept rolling, as if he was thinking about what Kong Xinmu's name was. Kong Xinmu. Tang Xiaoyu's slightly provocative words did not have any effect on Kong Xinmu. His thin lips moved slightly, and he spoke faintly. His calm and indifferent attitude suppressed Tang Xiaoyu in terms of momentum. Yes, Kong Xinmu. Tang Xiaoyu laughed heartily when he heard that. He stood in front of Kong Xinmu, looked Kong Xinmu up and down, and said, I heard that you have the method to make the heart-devouring blood centipede, and you also refined Elder Ao Tong of the demon god race into the heart-devouring blood centipede, which is very powerful. I wonder if you can share the refining method? Although Tang Xiaoyu asked, the key point was that he was still smiling cheekily. Just looking at it made people want to beat him up. The most surprising thing was that Tang Xiaoyu really dared to say it. Wasn't he afraid that he would die here? His words also made more people pay attention to Jiang Shenwu, who was in this place. Tang Xiaoyu, who was originally the focus of attention, instantly turned to Kong Xinmu. Especially when there were people from the demon god race not far away. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Didn't you teach me this? Kong Xinmu looked at Tang Xiaoyu and said faintly. As soon as he said that, the smile on Tang Xiaoyu's face froze. Tang Xiaoyu did not expect Kong Xinmu to say that. After holding it in for a long time, he could not say a word. As more and more cultivators gathered around, Tang Xiaoyu tiptoed and soared into the sky. Stop him! They had finally caught Tang Xiaoyu. How could they let him go just like that? In an instant, the street was filled with martial arts techniques. Even so, the crowd could not stop Tang Xiaoyu. The others did not see it, but Kong Xinmu saw it. The moment Tang Xiaoyu's figure soared into the sky, or even a moment before that, his aura disappeared. Then, his figure disappeared in the space. As the crowd blocked Tang Xiaoyu, Kong Xinmu and Wuxia also left the street. Kong Xinmu, the movement technique that the young man named Tang Xiaoyu used seems familiar, Wuxia said gently after thinking for a while. I seem to have seen it somewhere before. Kong Xinmu had encountered many opponents along the way and had seen all kinds of martial arts techniques and movement techniques. Tang Xiaoyu's space movement technique was very special, but it was not that he had not seen it before. It looks like the movement technique of someone from Sky Yuan Palace. Wuxia recalled Tang Xiaoyu's movement technique and remembered a description she had seen in an ancient book. Sky Yuan Palace? To Kong Shinmu, this was another unfamiliar word. Yes, Sky Yuan Palace. Mo Ya's lily-white hand formed a seal. Then, a jade slip appeared. Take a look. Mo Ya erased the seal on the jade slip and handed it to Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu used his soul consciousness to check and had a rough understanding of Sky Yuan Palace. However, the description of Sky Yuan Palace in the jade slip was based on the narration of others. There was a movement technique that was specially marked. Chapter 56-34. Mo Ya blinked her beautiful eyes and looked at Kong Shinmu, waiting for him to continue. As expected, I have never heard of it. Who would have thought that Kong Shinmu would suddenly say such a thing? Mo Ya, senior, it's not that I am ignorant, but my knowledge is limited, and I need more practice. Kong Shinmu smiled. This movement technique will be of great help when you use the black dragon scales in battle. Mo Ya pursed her lips and said gently. Senior, you are right, but where should I find it? This was undoubtedly a difficult problem for Kong Shinmu. He couldn't possibly snatch it from Tang Xiaoyu, right? However, after thinking about it carefully, it was not impossible. Mo Ya only saw that Kong Shinmu seemed to have made up his mind and found a direction to move forward. She was a little confused, but also a little relieved. Ancient wilderness, ancient city, city center. To everyone's surprise, this was not a palace or a square, but a desert area. No one would have thought that the city center of ancient wilderness, ancient city was actually a wasteland. At this time, the residents of ancient wilderness, ancient city gathered on the wasteland, and there were patrolling troops passing by from time to time. Cultivators who came to ancient wilderness, ancient city also arrived one after another. The three parties seemed to have made some kind of agreement, and their positions were very particular. The residents of ancient wilderness, ancient city stood in the innermost layer of the wasteland. They seemed to be waiting for the arrival of a certain sacred moment. Their expressions were solemn, and their pair of lifeless eyes stared at the right side of the wasteland. Following the residents of ancient wilderness, ancient city were the many cultivators who entered the city. The outermost layer was the patrolling troops of ancient wilderness, ancient city. So far, there were a total of 10 teams. These 10 teams could be said to be illogical and disorderly. They would go wherever they wanted to, but they would never touch the cultivators who entered the city. Everything seemed very calm. Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya came a little later, and there was still some distance from the wasteland. Looking at the route of the patrolling troops, there should be 2 teams passing by here. However, when the patrolling troops passed by, they would avoid Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. His attitude towards Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya was completely different from when he met them on the street. This made people wonder if the 10 patrol teams had received orders from someone and were ready to go. As time passed, dusk fell. During this period of time, the residents of the ancient desolate city were still looking at the right side of the desert. They did not intend to look away, nor did they have any intention of leaving. The 10 patrol teams' seemingly messy patrolling routes also began to reveal their fixed routes. All these signs indicated that they had received orders from someone. The 3 parties maintained a state of harmony on the surface. Until, suddenly, there was a strange movement. The source of the sound was surprisingly the place where the residents of the ancient desolate city were located in the innermost area of the desert. Kong Shinmu looked toward the source of the voice and saw the innermost residents of the ancient desolate city kneeling on the ground. No. Not prostrating. Looking at the way he fell to the ground, it seemed more like he had fainted. Could it be that night had fallen and the goo worms had lost their activity? Kong Shinmu, watch your step. Just as Kong Shinmu was pondering why those residents fell to the ground, he heard Mo Ya's voice. He quickly focused his attention and glanced at the right side where those residents had been staring at for a long time. Besides the sky being dark, there seemed to be nothing unusual. If only a few residents were staring at that direction, it would be fine. The problem was that all the residents were staring at that direction, which meant that it was not an ordinary place. Now that all the residents of the ancient desolate city had fallen to the ground, it was time for the controller to appear, right? Boom! Suddenly, there was an explosion in the crowd of cultivators. The crowd of cultivators was suddenly in an uproar. However, they were not discussing anything. Instead, the patrol teams in the periphery of the desert suddenly rushed toward the cultivators and launched an indiscriminate attack. As for the sudden explosion, it was the patrol team's attack. With a wave of their hands, the ground collapsed inch by inch. When Kang Xinmu noticed the chaotic scene, the desert had already collapsed. The ground collapsed, and those residents of the ancient desolate city also fell to the ground. The cultivators in the area all dashed away. However, there were still many cultivators who were brought to the hollow area below by the patrol team. The city master has appeared. A familiar voice came again. In such a chaotic moment, Tang Xiaoyu appeared again. However, Tang Xiaoyu's appearance was somewhat disheveled. His clothes were tattered and stained with blood. There were also bloodstains on his face, and the aura that leaked out from his body was chaotic. He looked like he had gone through a huge battle, as if he had just survived a disaster. The shout of "The city master has appeared" just now came from Tang Xiaoyu. Tang Xiaoyu used his extraordinary body movement to avoid the patrol team's attack. After landing, before Tang Xiaoyu could heave a sigh of relief, he saw Kang Xinmu staring at him. What a coincidence! When Tang Xiaoyu saw Kang Xinmu, he was stunned at first, but then he grinned brightly. Kang Xinmu smiled without saying a word. I just remembered that I have something to do. I'll leave first. Tang Xiaoyu smiled on the surface, but he was cursing inwardly. When he came here, he had used Kang Xinmu to distract his enemies. He did not expect to see Kang Xinmu again so soon. Now, no one can get out. Kang Xinmu smiled meaningfully. I have something to do in the city. Tang Xiaoyu's body stiffened. I think all the cultivators are gathered here. Kang Xinmu crossed his arms, looking at Tang Xiaoyu with a teasing look. I know. I have something to do, not looking for someone. Tang Xiaoyu braced himself and said, then quickened his pace. As he walked, he released his soul consciousness to check on Kang Xinmu's movements. When he saw that Kang Xinmu did not chase after him, he hurriedly hid in the crowd. Aren't you going to chase after him? Mo Ya's pretty face was smiling, her voice gentle. Senior, you sound like I'm going to chase after someone I like. Kang Xinmu felt a little awkward. I don't think so. Mo Ya covered her mouth and smiled. Kang Xinmu had always thought that he was not a gentleman, but he was not the kind of person who would take advantage of others' misfortune. He was not in a hurry to understand the 10,000 elephants' origin folding technique. Moreover, he did not have the time to deal with Tang Xiaoyu. The sky on the right side of the desolate ancient city, which had been stared at by all the residents, was still normal. However, the ground below was abnormal. Soon, a 3-meter-tall palace rose from the space below. Chapter 56:35. Since the city lord's mansion had appeared, it seemed that the city lord was indeed going to appear. To be able to control an entire ancient city full of puppets, the city lord must not be an ordinary person. Kang Xinmu's eyes had experienced the tempering of the 7 devouring demons' sealing art, and could see things that ordinary people could not see. The city lord's mansion's palace in front of him seemed to be only 1 zhang tall, but it was actually a spatial artifact. As for what kind of artifact it was, he might have to be there to find out. After the city lord's mansion appeared, it occupied the empty space on the ground. At this moment, the surrounding patrolling troops suddenly disappeared. The palace's door slowly opened. Looking in from the outside, one could only see pitch-black darkness. Kang Xinmu's gaze was fixed on the pitch-black palace. The more he looked, the more he felt that the pitch-black space was familiar. Especially the subtle connection with the 7 devouring demons' sealing art, it appeared again. Could it be that the fragment of the 7 devouring demons' sealing art was in this palace? The ground began to shake violently, and even the space around them was shaking. Kang Xinmu's sharp senses sensed that this sudden vibration should be the secret realm moving. One must know that this was a moving secret realm. If the secret realm was moving at this time, then leaving the secret realm might be far away from the dragon demon cave. As for where they would end up, this was an unknown mystery. All the cultivators present were the cream of the crop among supreme-level cultivators. Faced with the constantly shaking space, they quickly figured out what was going on. The secret realm is actually moving again. A long sigh sounded. Then, a voice full of resentment rang out, "This is bad, it wasn't easy to get rid of those suckers, and now we're going to meet again." This was supposed to be a very common complaint. But at this moment, it seemed extremely special. At first glance, there was nothing wrong with this person's words. But if one thought about it carefully, one would realize that there was a profound meaning behind this person's words. He knew where the secret realm was about to appear. Kang Xinmu searched the crowd for the person who spoke. Very quickly, he locked onto a young man. The young man was dressed very ordinarily, and he looked like a passerby. In terms of appearance, there was nothing special about him, the kind that could not be picked out in a crowd. "Heis, what kind of sin have I committed?" When Kang Xinmu locked onto the young man's right hand was rubbing his tightly furrowed brows and sighing again and again. It wasn't just Kang Xinmu. Even the cultivators around the young man had noticed him and were sizing him up. The young man seemed to have noticed the gazes of the surrounding people, and he put away his distressed expression. "I wish you all good luck. I shall not disturb you any further." With that, the young man disappeared on the spot. Kang Xinmu's pupils shrank. Wasn't this young man using the manifestation origin superposition technique? Moreover, he was much more familiar with the manifestation origin stacking technique compared to Tang Xiaoyu. Thinking back to what the young man had said, the next place the secret realm would appear might be where the heavenly Yuan Palace was. It's the manifestation origin superposition technique? There was no lack of experienced and knowledgeable cultivators who quickly recognized the manifestation origin stacking technique that the young man had performed. Is he from the heavenly Yuan Palace? Didn't they say that the heavenly Yuan Palace had disappeared with the extraterritorial devil dragons? How could they possibly appear here? Immediately, someone raised the question. How many years ago was that? Kang Xinmu had also obtained a lot of information about the heavenly Yuan Palace from the conversations of these cultivators. Of course, he also heard the words, extraterritorial devil dragons. As a member of the Dragon God clan, Kang Xinmu more or less knew about the deeds of the ancestors in the clan. One of the ancestors who had gone out to train and then disappeared had come into contact with the extraterritorial devil dragons. Therefore, Kang Xinmu was not unfamiliar with the words, extraterritorial devil dragons. It was just that he did not expect that the extraterritorial devil dragons would have a certain connection with the heavenly Yuan Palace. I have a question. Can we leave the desolate ancient city by performing the manifestation origin stacking technique? Suddenly, there was an untimely question. Kang Xinmu raised his eyebrows when he heard the question. Then, his eyes quickly locked on the figure of the person who came. Tang Xiaoyu had clearly seen that Kang Xinmu was not here, so he asked this question. But he did not expect that Kang Xinmu was still here. Not only that, the distance between him and Kang Xinmu seemed to be narrowing. Is there a need to ask? Using the manifestation origin stacking technique, we can definitely leave the desolate ancient city. But, except for you. Although everyone recognized that the person who asked the question was Tang Xiaoyu, they still answered Tang Xiaoyu's question enthusiastically. It was a clear female voice. Why would you ask such a stupid question? The person who answered Tang Xiaoyu was a woman in a black dress. The woman curled her lips into an evil smile, shook the whip in her hand, and stared at Tang Xiaoyu with a pair of bright eyes. Gufeng, I think the stupid person is you. Based on your ability, how would you know the mystery of the manifestation origin stacking technique? Tang Xiaoyu was somewhat embarrassed when the woman questioned him in front of everyone, so he immediately retorted. The woman called Gufeng nodded when she heard this. Indeed, I overestimated you. With your ability, of course, you can't understand the mystery of the manifestation origin stacking technique. Gufeng, didn't anyone tell you that when a lady goes out to train, she should know how to control her princess temperament at home? Tang Xiaoyu gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. I'm so scared when you say that. Gufeng followed Tang Xiaoyu's words, and while responding, she also cooperated with him and made a frightened expression. You're really pretentious. Tang Xiaoyu glanced at Gufeng with a face full of disdain. As he spoke, his figure disappeared from where he was. At the same time, Gufeng took a step to the side, and the whip in her hand suddenly lashed out. Kang Xinmu's expression froze. This woman had some tricks. Don't come out and embarrass yourself with these little tricks of yours. Hurry up and hand over the thing, and I'll spare your life. Gufeng's voice instantly turned cold, and the whip in her hand suddenly pulling Tang Xiaoyu back. I've said it 800 times, I didn't take it. Even if you invited your father here, I still didn't take it. Tang Xiaoyu's face was full of helplessness. He seemed to be completely unsurprised that Gufeng could pull him back from the manifestation origin stacking technique. However, even though he was tied up by Gufeng's whip, his expression was still calm, and his tone was neither fast nor slow. To deal with a clown like you, there's no need for my father to do it himself. Gufeng suddenly lashed the whip. Two intertwined flood dragons, one black and one white, flashed on the whip. With a fierce momentum, they approached Tang Xiaoyu. You so-called aristocrats really disgust the way you do things, Tang Xiaoyu said indifferently, easily resolving Gufeng's attack. At the same time, Tang Xiaoyu's figure appeared next to Kang Xinmu. He seemed to be very familiar with Kang Xinmu, as he ignored Kang Xinmu's cold warning gaze and patted Kang Xinmu's shoulder. Chapter 56-36. Tang Xiaoyu used the manifestation origin superposition technique next to Kang Xinmu, completely exposing his whereabouts to Kang Xinmu's eyes. The manifestation origin superposition technique was a movement technique, and it was currently the only space-type movement technique. When Tang Xiaoyu used the manifestation origin superposition technique just now, a door opened in the space beside him. There were 3 layers of space inside the door, and Tang Xiaoyu entered one of them. Kang Xinmu memorized the path of these 3 layers of space, and roughly estimated the location of the exit. Just like the 3 layers of space that appeared, there would be 3 landing points. One of them would be Tang Xiaoyu's landing point, and the other 2 were not for the purpose of confusion, but the landing points that he might reach in a short period of time. This was the essence of origin superposition. Tang Xiaoyu's figure appeared in one of the 3 places that Kang Xinmu predicted, but it was not the first place that Kang Xinmu had guessed. As for the other 2 spots that were supposed to be his landing spots, there were no spatial fluctuations. This was because Tang Xiaoyu had stacked the 3 layers of space together when he teleported. Tang Xiaoyu's manifestation origin superposition technique seemed to be full of flaws, but it could stack 3 layers of space in an instant, so it should not be underestimated. Tang Xiaoyu, do you mean that the thing that you stole is on him? Gufeng's eyes narrowed, and she sized up Kang Xinmu suspiciously. Just him? Kang Xinmu gave Gufeng a very bad impression. Whether it was his appearance, clothes, or the aura that leaked out, all aspects were extremely shabby. While Gufeng was sizing up Kong Shinmu, Tang Xiaoyu had already left. Kong Shinmu's eyes were fixed on Tang Xiaoyu's figure the whole time. There was a certain distance between him and Tang Xiaoyu just now, and he could only faintly see that there were 4 layers of space in the space that Tang Xiaoyu had opened. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Seeing that Kong Shinmu was ignoring her, Gufeng frowned and waved her whip at Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu was just about to dodge when he saw Moya suddenly stretch out her lily-white hand and accurately grab the unpredictable whip. "Little girl, didn't your family teach you to respect your elder brothers?" Even though Moya's voice was gentle, her beautiful eyes contained an unquestionable dignity. "Who are you?" Gufeng turned to look at Moya when she heard that. After sizing him up, he frowned. Not only was the woman dressed very plainly, but she also gave off the feeling that she was sick. How could such a weak person dare to shout at her? "Which clan are you from? How dare you speak to me in such a tone? Do you know who I am?" Gufeng glanced at Moya disdainfully and walked towards Kong Shinmu. Compared to the weak woman, Tang Xiaoyu's eldest brother looked extraordinarily heroic. The aura that leaked out from his body was very ethereal, giving off an unfathomable feeling. "Hand it over." Gufeng narrowed her eyes and stood facing Kong Shinmu. "Young lady, you are so rude." Faced with Gufeng, who did not distinguish right from wrong, Moya frowned. "You shut up." Gufeng waved her hand and swung her whip at Moya. Kong Shinmu leaned to the side and reached out to grab Gufeng's whip. "I haven't settled the score with you yet, and you dare to retaliate?" Gufeng raised her eyebrows and glared at Kong Shinmu. She muttered some incantation and the whip suddenly wrapped around Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu secretly exerted force and pulled the whip hard, flinging Gufeng to the side. At this moment, Gufeng sensed the tyrannical level of Kong Shinmu's cultivation. His supreme divine power was barely at the 6th level. Compared to that good-for-nothing Tang Xiaoyu, he was still a long way off. Trying to be a hero and save a damsel in distress. Why don't you see if you have the ability to do so? Gufeng stomped on the air and steadied herself. She took the opportunity to change her target to Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu immediately released the supreme soul power. The supreme power of the soul instantly swept towards Gufeng, locking her whip and changing the direction of the whip's attack. When Gufeng swung her whip, the whip almost wrapped around herself. She retracted her whip in time and avoided a mistake. Of course, Gufeng was not weak. She had been hit just now because she had underestimated her opponent. Not only did she look down on Moya, but she also looked down on Kong Shinmu, who stood up for Moya. "I couldn't tell that you actually cultivated the supreme soul power?" Gufeng naturally recognized Kong Shinmu's supreme soul power and was slightly surprised. "Don't touch her." Kong Shinmu glanced at Gufeng coldly and said in a cold voice. He didn't care what they said, but he definitely could not say anything about Senior Moya. "I will touch whoever I want to touch. It's not your place to point fingers at a nobody like you." Gufeng's voice was sharp. She waved her hand and the long crimson whip appeared in her hand again. Her unruly and domineering behavior was seen by every cultivator present. Among them, many cultivators who had entered the mystic realm long ago had heard of Gufeng's deeds. It was no exaggeration to say that wherever Gufeng went, she would snatch it. As long as she had her eyes on something, she would definitely snatch it, regardless of the means. There were also people who had fought with Gufeng and were unhappy with her, but there was nothing they could do. The cultivators who had interacted with Gufeng knew that she had been chasing after Tang Xiaoyu from Heavenly Yuan Palace. Since she dared to offend people from Heavenly Yuan Palace, Gufeng must have an extraordinary background. "Wait, your name is Kong Shinmu, right?" Gufeng recognized Kong Shinmu. You have the heaven and earth saint-grade supreme devil seal and you still dare to show off. She did not hide her thoughts at all and her words were full of disdain. Very few people knew that Kang Xinmu had the heaven and earth saint-grade supreme devil seal in his possession. Now that Gufeng had exposed it in front of so many people, Kang Xinmu was in a lot of trouble. The people around them had already turned their attention to Kang Xinmu and were discussing something. Tang Xiaoyu, who had originally escaped, had returned from the crowd. He happened to hear Gufeng's words. Gufeng was planning on snatching Kang Xinmu's heaven and earth saint-grade supreme devil seal. Nothing could happen to this brat right now. Are all the people from the Boundless sect this rude? Tang Xiaoyu squeezed through the crowd and stood in front of Gufeng. Tang Xiaoyu, you still dare to come back? Gufeng's eyebrows jumped as she laughed mockingly. Why wouldn't I dare to come back? Tang Xiaoyu glanced at Gufeng strangely. He turned around and gave Kang Xinmu a look, indicating for him to take Emoya away. Kang Xinmu didn't stand on ceremony. He took Emoya with him and left the street. Hand over what you stole from my house. Gufeng was the first to object to Kang Xinmu's request to leave. Is there something wrong with your brain? I'm the one who stole from your house. Why are you looking for me? Tang Xiaoyu stared at Gufeng, speechless. Suddenly, he realized that he had said something wrong and corrected himself. No, I took it openly. If you stole it, you stole it. Don't make it sound so righteous. Gufeng lashed out with her whip at Tang Xiaoyu. Once I'm done with you, I'll go find that Kang Xinmu and settle the score. Tang Xiaoyu easily dodged Gufeng's whip. You can't hit me, right? Chapter 56-37. Gufeng's figure followed the direction of the whip and disappeared. What a crazy woman. Tang Xiaoyu was stunned by Gufeng's actions. Before entering the city, this woman had stolen the Chunyu family's demonic spirit zither from Chunyupan, and now she was eyeing Kang Xinmu's extreme 10-directional devil seal. What a thief! Kang Xinmu and Emoya avoided the crowd and temporarily maintained a certain distance from the city lord's residence. Kang Xinmu and Emoya were facing the entrance of the city lord's residence, so they could vaguely see the mysteries of the city lord's residence. The 7 devouring demon sealing art that had fallen into the ancient desolate city was most likely in this palace. The two of them were now on the side of the city lord's residence. Kang Xinmu's connection to the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art was still the same as before. It was not very strong, but there was always a connection. This difference might have occurred because the city lord's residence itself was an artifact. If he entered the palace, his connection to the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art might disappear. The city lord's residence had just appeared. Although the gate was already open, all the cultivators chose to wait and see. Currently, no one had entered. Kang Xinmu and Emoya were also waiting for a suitable opportunity. Senior, be careful. Kang Xinmu keenly sensed a cold aura in the air around him. He quickly reacted and pulled Emoya to the side. With a wave of his hand, he grabbed a whip. The entire body of the whip was dark red, and there were dense and complicated patterns on it. Faintly, the smell of blood could be sensed from it. It was the whip that the woman from the Boundless sect was holding. What surprised Kang Xinmu was that the bloody aura on the whip was very pungent, and when he grabbed the whip, it was stained with dark red blood. This blood was stained just now. Kang Xinmu's eyes narrowed as he glanced in the direction the whip had come from. This whip seemed to have come from the void, but in reality, it was so fast that it seemed to have disappeared. Anyone who stood in the way of the whip had their bodies pierced by the whip. The speed was so fast that some cultivators did not even have time to react before their bodies were pierced by Gufeng's whip. This was no ordinary whip. Rather, it had been soaked in the blood of the Boundless sect's guardian beast, the Scarlet Flame Qilin. This whip contained the power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline. Gu Feng named it Blood Scar. The boundless sect Scarlet Flame Qilin was the first beast to grasp method power in its beast form. Even though there had been very little news about the Scarlet Flame Qilin within the Boundless sect in recent years, most people were still wary of the Boundless sect's existence. As the daughter of the Boundless sect's sect master, Gu Feng's background was incredibly powerful. Very few people dared to provoke her. In addition, she had been soaked in the power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline. Very few people were a match for Gu Feng. Only Tang Xiaoyu wasn't afraid of Gu Feng. He had first snuck into the Boundless sect, then stolen the Boundless sect's most prized treasure right in front of the Boundless sect's elders. Tang Xiaoyu had indeed stolen it, but he didn't have the ability to open the box that contained the Boundless sect's treasures. The Boundless sect's people knew this, which was why they didn't pursue the matter. They planned to capture Tang Xiaoyu as soon as the auction began. Gu Feng, however, refused to let Tang Xiaoyu go no matter what. She chased him all the way to the sealed realm. "Brother, let go." Tang Xiaoyu rushed over from the side. When he saw Kong Xinmu grab Gu Feng's blood scar with his bare hands, he reminded him. "This is that crazy woman's blood scar. It has been soaked in the Scarlet Flame Qilin's bloodline. It is incredibly powerful, and it loves to feast on human blood." Tang Xiaoyu seemed like a sloppy person, but he was actually quite meticulous. Naturally, he could tell that Kong Xinmu was not an ordinary person. The person who held the Extreme 10 Directions Demon Seal was most likely related to Emperor Shi. After all, Emperor Shi was his idol. He had always wanted to meet his idol, but he hadn't had many opportunities to do so. Now that he was able to see someone who was related to his idol, Tang Xiaoyu wanted to seize this opportunity. Kong Xinmu had seen records of the Scarlet Flame Qilin before. The missing ancestor of the dragon gods seemed to have fought with the Scarlet Flame Qilin. According to the records, the Scarlet Flame Qilin lost to the ancestor and disappeared. From what Tang Xiaoyu said, it seemed to be in the Wuxia sect. Kong Xinmu gripped the whip tightly. He felt waves of heat from it. This was the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin. Although the power was very weak, it was indeed the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin. The bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin, which was soaked in the blood scar, also sensed Kong Xinmu's bloodline power of the dragon gods. At this moment, Kong Xinmu felt an extremely strong burning power. The bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin on the blood scar instantly swept towards him. Kong Xinmu secretly released the bloodline power of the dragon gods to resist the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin. When the two powerful bloodline powers collided, the dim light around the whip suddenly lit up. The dark red whip suddenly turned crimson. A strong burning sensation spread from his body. In the end, Kong Xinmu's bloodline power of the dragon gods suppressed the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin. In this battle of bloodline powers, it seemed that Kong Xinmu had the upper hand, but in reality, he didn't gain any advantage. After all, the blood scar was only soaked in the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin, so it only contained a small part of the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin. Just a small part of the bloodline power was enough to be on par with Kong Xinmu. One could imagine how powerful the Scarlet Flame Qilin was. The battle between Kong Xinmu and the bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin on the blood scar was very short. It only lasted for 3 breaths. Tang Xiaoyu shot a glance at Jiang Shenwu with an additional trace of thought-provoking meaning in his eyes. Gu Feng followed closely. When she saw that Kong Xinmu had caught her blood scar, her pretty face was terrifyingly gloomy. "You're not afraid of death?" Gu Feng narrowed her eyes, and a sharp light flashed in her eyes. Kong Xinmu clearly felt that there was a trace of cold aura on the whip. Different from the burning bloodline power of the Scarlet Flame Qilin, this cold aura made Kong Xinmu feel cold. With the strength of Kong Xinmu's body, ordinary cold and heat couldn't hurt him at all. What was that sharp light that flashed in her eyes? Hey, crazy woman, can't you look at the occasion? At first, Tang Xiaoyu called Kong Xinmu Big Brother purely to keep Gufeng busy, but he didn't really want to hurt Kong Xinmu. If Kong Xinmu could really see his idol, if he followed Kong Xinmu, he might also see his idol. Seeing that Kong Xinmu was being bullied by Gufeng, Tang Xiaoyu definitely wouldn't agree. Tang Xiaoyu, don't get in the way. Gufeng waved her hand, and the blood scar that Kong Xinmu had caught suddenly disappeared. When it appeared again, it had already tied up Tang Xiaoyu. At this moment, at the entrance of the city lord residence, a strong suction suddenly emerged and wrapped all the cultivators present. Chapter 56-38. Find a well? Kong Xinmu glanced at Tang Xiaoyu and saw him being dragged out of the city lord residence's array by Gufeng Shuigu. He couldn't help but sigh. Shuigu was indeed soaked in the red flame Qilin's blood. He could even break free from the array. The suction force from the city lord residence gradually formed an array around the palace. All the cultivators within the spell formation were locked on. The suction force from the array was so strong that even Kong Xinmu couldn't break free for a while. Among them, many cultivators had already been sucked into the palace by the array. All the cultivators gathered around the palace were here for the fragment of the 7 devouring demons sealing art. They were all strong cultivators. Although many cultivators were sucked into the array, there were also some cultivators who followed the array into the palace. There were also a few cultivators who had entered the palace before the array was activated. Kong Xinmu didn't belong to any of these three situations. The array's suction force was very strong. It locked his chi meridians for a while and prevented him from circulating the power in his body. However, Kong Xinmu's supreme divine fire power had already reached a terrifying level. He had also comprehended the supreme divine fire domain. Naturally, he could analyze clearly that the array that emerged from the city lord residence was actually a domain field that contained many kinds of domain powers. After being refined by the 7 devouring demon sealing art, Kong Xinmu's devouring power could devour domain powers. He boldly released his devouring power and devoured a part of the array's power. The moment Kong Xinmu released his devouring power, Moya sensed it. She knew that Kong Xinmu was going to devour the array's power. She frowned and looked at Kong Xinmu nervously. This formation was a domain field, and it contained several types of domain force. She knew that Kong Xinmu's devouring power could devour domain powers. However, it might be troublesome to devour so much domain powers at once. Unparalleled cultivators could cultivate unparalleled divine power. When they reached a certain realm, they would be able to comprehend the corresponding unparalleled domain power. Domain power was a cultivator's spiritual power and was controlled by the cultivator's consciousness. The battle between the supreme domain powers between cultivators could also be understood as the strength of one's soul consciousness. Generally speaking, no cultivator would allow a domain power that did not belong to them to invade their soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness. If there was even the slightest mistake, the destruction of the supreme domain would be a small matter. However, if one's soul and consciousness were to be possessed, then it would be no different from the heart-devouring blood centipede. The array that Kong Xinmu wanted to devour was too complicated. Moya's beautiful eyes were fixed on Kong Xinmu's situation. If there was even the slightest mistake, she would have to stop Kong Xinmu immediately. Kong Xinmu was aware of the strength of the domain power he could devour, so he knew how to control himself. Although this was the case, Kong Xinmu was very bold. The devouring power that he released did not seem to have any intention of stopping as it continued to devour the domain power. There was a total of 5 types of domain power in the domain power that he devoured. Among them was the supreme divine fire domain power. This unexpected gain was something that Kong Xinmu did not expect. The first type of supreme domain power that he comprehended was the supreme divine fire domain power. If he devoured the supreme divine fire domain power in the array, his supreme divine fire domain power would achieve a qualitative breakthrough. After Kong Shinmu devoured the surrounding array, he realized that the array's restriction on him had disappeared. Emoya, who was beside him, also did not seem to be restricted by the array. Kong Shinmu could not help but sigh at Senior Emoya's strength. When Senior Emoya possessed powerful supreme divine power, she also had a corresponding supreme divine power domain power. Senior Emoya's supreme divine power was very strong, so the corresponding domain power would only be stronger. Facing the restriction of the array, it would naturally not be affected. Without the restriction of the array, Kong Shinmu could leave the array and the palace's surroundings at any time. Before the array appeared, Kong Shinmu had already sensed that there was something strange in the palace. In addition, with the 7 devouring demon sealing arts remnant senses, he definitely had to enter the palace. Even without the restriction of the array, Kong Shinmu still took the initiative to approach the palace. Emoya saw that Kong Shinmu was not affected by the array's domain power, so she followed behind Kong Shinmu. The moment he stepped through the palace's doors, an obscure power instantly attacked him, but it was quickly retracted. Kong Shinmu suddenly released the power of his soul. The moment the power was retracted, it swept over and locked a portion of the power. This was an extremely cold power. There was only a tiny bit of it, and Kong Shinmu was temporarily unable to identify what kind of power it was. Moreover, his soul consciousness and sea of consciousness could not contain this power. Kong Shinmu could only keep this power in the extreme 10-directional devil seal. The interior of the palace looked very different from the outside. The outside looked very small, but the inside was actually very big. The only connection was that the abnormality that he saw from the outside was real. The fog that appeared in front of him was not spiritual energy, nor was it any other aura that could be used for cultivation. Instead, it was the aura of an artifact that had been stored for a long time. There were thousands of weapons in the world, but only those that had an artifact spirit were artifacts. The strength of an artifact spirit would also determine the strength of an artifact. Of course, there were artifacts that were created by blacksmiths, and there were also artifacts that were born in the world. For the same type of artifact, artifacts that were born in the world were much stronger than those that were created by blacksmiths. It was precisely because they absorbed the power of nature in the world that they could become so strong. Correspondingly, such a strong artifact was also harder to control. Artifacts that were born in the world were more likely to turn on their owners. Every type of artifact that was left in the world for a long time would leak its own power. After a long time, the spiritual energy that leaked out would accumulate to a certain extent and become new power. From a certain point of view, it could be considered as an artifact that was derived from an artifact. In other words, this palace was indeed an artifact. Kong Shinmu, we can look for the source of this aura. We might be able to find an artifact that was derived from it. Emoya's beautiful eyes scanned the surroundings, and her beautiful eyes locked onto a certain direction. It just so happened that Kong Shinmu also found the source of the aura, so they headed over together. Although the palace was an artifact, it had its own space, and its internal structure was no different from the mystic realm outside the ancient antiquity city. There were quite a number of cultivators that entered the palace earlier, but Kong Shinmu and Emoya had been walking for a while, but they did not see a single cultivator. Instead, it felt like they had reached the end of the road. Kong Shinmu looked behind him. The road behind him was filled with white fog, and there was still not a single cultivator coming over. "Senior, please wait here for a while." Since the fog was derived from an artifact, it could be devoured. Chapter 56-39. The white mist that permeated the surrounding space was the same as the formation that came out of the palace. It was essentially a type of domain power. However, Compared to the complex domain power contained in the magic array, the domain power in the white mist was relatively simple. It could be understood as a part of the domain power in the formation. It was the holy ice domain power. Although Kang Shinmu could devour this power, he could not absorb it and use it for himself. The supreme domain power was a type of mental power that supreme cultivators could comprehend when their supreme god power reached a certain level. It was above the supreme god power and required a corresponding supreme god power to release it. So far, Kang Shinmu had only comprehended the power of the supreme god fire and the power of the heart soul. He still had not mastered the power of the Holy Land and had not come into contact with the power of the supreme god ice. There were 9 types of supreme god power in the blood mist. Among them was the power of the supreme god ice. However, compared to the power of the supreme god fire, the power of the supreme god ice was not easy to control. The 2 types of supreme god power did not sound very different, but in reality, there was an insurmountable gap between them. The power of the supreme god fire was the leader of all the flames in the world. With the power of the supreme god fire, one could control all the flames in the world. The power of the supreme god ice was different. The power of the supreme god ice did not control the ice or water of the great thousand worlds. Instead, it created ice out of thin air. It focused on creating ice out of thin air and then giving the created ice power to become one's own power. Kang Shinmu did not understand the sacred of the supreme god ice. Perhaps it had something to do with the lost supreme god power, but it was not something he could understand with his current power. However, if he obtained the complete power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, it would be much easier to find clues about the lost supreme god power. All in all, before Kang Shinmu comprehended the power of the supreme god ice, he could not use the power of the supreme god ice domain. This power could only be placed in the extreme 10-directional devil seal. That was what Kang Shinmu thought at first, but reality was different. The power of the supreme holy ice domain, which had been devoured by the devouring power, was hidden in his mind and sea of consciousness. Kang Shinmu tried to sense it, but he was unable to detect the existence of the supreme holy ice domain. However, the power of the supreme sacred ice domain had not been rejected by his consciousness, so he did not pay much attention to it. After Kang Shinmu swallowed the white mist around him, his field of vision became much wider. He could also see cultivators passing by one after another. The cultivators who passed by were from different camps, but they were all moving in the same direction. That must be where the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art was located. Senior Moya, let's go. Kang Shinmu and Moya also found the direction and followed the cultivators in front of them. Along the way, he met many people. I wonder how much longer it will take for Elder Sun to subdue this magic artifact. I feel that I will not even be able to defeat the power generated by this magic artifact. A long sigh came from the white mist. Then, someone bumped into Kang Shinmu. Sorry. That person apologized to Kang Shinmu politely. Kang Shinmu saw the person who bumped into him. He was dressed in black and white clothes, and the few people behind him were also dressed in the same clothes. However, the patterns embroidered on their clothes were different. The one who apologized had a complete tattoo of a mandala flower, while the few behind him only had flower petals. Their status was high, and it was obvious at a glance. The other party was also sizing up Kang Shinmu. After scanning Kang Shinmu from head to toe, he frowned. Then, he glanced at Moya, who was beside him, and his expression suddenly became strange. You are Kang Shinmu, right? Just now, he was still apologizing to Kang Shinmu politely, but when he saw that there were only 2 of them, Kang Shinmu and Moya, his tone suddenly became arrogant. I heard that you have a heaven and earth sacred item. Even the way he looked at Kang Shinmu was disdainful. He slanted his eyes, raised his head, and had the attitude of a superior. Senior Brother Song, why are you talking nonsense with them? Let's get the heaven and earth sacred item before anyone finds them. The few disciples behind the person who spoke looked at Kong Shinmu and Emoya and said. It was obvious that senior brother Song did not want to let Kong Shinmu off just like that. There's no hurry, take your time. He even glanced at Emoya from time to time. To Kong Shinmu, this person was nothing more than a petty person who got what he wanted. One look and he could tell that he was usually bullied, which was why he apologized when he didn't see who he bumped into. When he saw that there was only Kong Shinmu and a weak girl, he immediately became excited. Kong Shinmu was used to this kind of person, so he didn't want to bother with him. However, he just had to put his attention on Emoya, so he couldn't let him off so easily. Let's not talk about the heaven and earth sacred item first, this girl is really hot. Senior brother Song looked at Emoya unscrupulously. Emoya frowned in disgust. How could Kong Shinmu tolerate a despicable person disrespecting Emoya? He didn't say anything else and waved his hand to give senior brother Song a solid punch on his face. This punch contained a powerful dragon martial technique, and it sent senior brother Song flying. He rolled for a few meters before he slowly came to a stop. Kid, do you know who I am? How dare you hit me? Senior brother Song wiped his mouth, and a few of his teeth fell out. Kong Shinmu was tired of hearing such familiar words. No matter who he was, he wouldn't let anyone who disrespected Emoya off. Kong Shinmu didn't say anything else, and he quickly repelled the junior brothers who wanted to help senior brother Song. He thought that there wouldn't be any more trouble, but the real trouble had just arrived. Just as Kong Shinmu repelled senior brother Song, a sword chi came from the front and stopped between Kong Shinmu and senior brother Song. If Kong Shinmu insisted on killing senior brother Song, he would definitely be hit by the sword chi, and both sides would be injured. The owner of the sword chi seemed to be warning Kong Shinmu. Kong Shinmu naturally understood the purpose of the sword chi, but he didn't retreat. He charged forward, and his palm struck the forehead of senior brother Song, who couldn't react in time. Senior brother Song didn't even have time to scream, and he collapsed to the ground. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. The owner of the sword chi also revealed himself. It was Ao Feng of the demon god race. Ao Feng glanced at senior brother Song, and his face darkened. Kong Shinmu, you really aren't afraid of death. The sound of wind breaking could be heard, and the demon god race descended. At the same time, the surrounding white fog disappeared, and the true appearance of this place was revealed. It was a space of endless darkness, and only the space under their feet was emitting a strange dark light. All of you back off. I will deal with him. Ao Feng's sword skills were impressive, and he was confident that he could take down Kong Shinmu. He had only swallowed someone else's supreme divine power, and he dared to do whatever he wanted. He even refined Ao Tong into a heart-devouring blood centipede. This was unforgivable. Ao Feng's hatred for Kong Shinmu could no longer be described with words. He, who only wanted revenge, didn't show any mercy to Kong Shinmu, and attacked immediately. Kong Shinmu immediately released his black dragon scales, and with the help of the black dragon scales, he caught a few sword chi from Ao Feng. After catching a few sword chi, he suddenly realized that these sword chi were not ordinary sword chi. They contained a sword chi domain. The sword chi domain ignored the defense of the black dragon scales, and it almost pierced through them. Chapter 5640. Supreme Divine Flame Domain. The moment Kong Shinmu released the Supreme Divine Flame Domain, Ao Feng recognized it. He sneered. Is this what you're relying on? You and Ao Tong can't be brothers, right? So much nonsense. Kong Shinmu raised his eyebrows and said lightly. The Supreme Divine Fire Domain resisted the Sword Chi Domain that swept over. It would have been better if Kong Shinmu did not mention Ao Tong. Now that he mentioned Ao Tong, Ao Feng's face darkened, and the aura around him turned cold. Kong Shinmu, I will make you pay me back tenfold. On the sword in Ao Feng's hand, two auras, one black and one white, emerged from the blade. A powerful sword energy suddenly appeared. In an instant, the entire space was left with two colors, black and white. Just like the auras that emerged from the blade, black and white represented two different attributes. White represented light, and black represented darkness. Normally, these two attributes would counter each other. But at this moment, these two attributes were perfectly combined, forming a powerful holy sword energy. Ao Feng waved his sword lightly, and the holy sword energy around him turned into multiple rays of sword energy that shot towards Kong Shinmu. As Kong Shinmu released his black dragon scales, he sent Emoya out of the range of the holy sword energy. The power of Ao Feng's supreme holy sword suddenly descended. The moment the holy sword energy swept over, Kong Shinmu already knew that his black dragon scales might not be able to block the sword energy. As expected, the black dragon scales were cut open by the holy sword energy. The pitch-black dragon scales were actually unable to withstand the power of the holy sword. Suddenly, Kong Shinmu thought of the dark steel power. The moment the holy sword energy cut open the black dragon scales, Kong Shinmu used his powerful soul consciousness to release the dark steel power. The power of dark steel immediately spread out around Jiang Shenwu's body, forming a black-colored cover. Currently, Kong Shinmu did not cultivate the supreme dark steel power, so the dark steel power shield was only at its basic level. After withstanding two rays of sword energy, the shield formed by the dark steel power was directly broken. The powerful sword chi forced Jiang Shenwu to retreat again and again. Only when his back was against the spatial barrier was he forced to stop. He only felt that his internal organs were about to shift positions, and the bursts of stabbing pain made him feel uncomfortable all over. My holy sword energy is specially used to break your dark steel shield. This was the first time the two clashed, and Ao Feng had the absolute advantage. He did not give Kong Shinmu any chance to catch his breath and waved his sword again. Two bolts of lightning, one black and one white, emerged from within and gradually condensed together, forming a phantom that resembled a kun and charged straight at Jiang Shenwu. The image carried a bloodline pressure, making Kong Shinmu, who was not in a good state, unable to move for a while. It was so fast that even though Kong Shinmu's eyes had been tempered by the seven devouring demon sealing art, he could only barely catch a glimpse of it. The moment Ao Feng released the sword energy, Kong Shinmu's soul consciousness felt an unprecedented sense of danger. If he were to face this power head-on with his current strength, he would most likely be smashed into pieces. Kong Shinmu did not hesitate to release his soul consciousness. Under the effect of his soul consciousness, the power in Kong Shinmu's body circulated a few times. That feeling of pressure gradually weakened. Although the image of the kun formed by the black and white lightning was not the divine beast that Kong Shinmu knew, it was not able to cause pressure to Kong Shinmu, who was from the dragon god race. The pressure just now was just a kind of blood-binding ability. In other words, it was a part of the power of the supreme holy sword. It could lock a cultivator's blood and cause pressure to the cultivator's soul consciousness. This kind of pressure could directly destroy a cultivator's willpower. Many puppeteers who refined the heart-devouring blood centipede would use this method. The pressure disappeared, and Kong Shinmu released the supreme divine fire domain. Using the power of the domain, Kong Shinmu's figure flashed to the side. The sword energy formed by the black and white lightning suddenly descended. Boom! The powerful force shattered the ground under his feet and tore the space apart. Gusts of storms came from the shattered void. The seemingly ordinary gray shadow was destroying everything in this space with a destructive force. Two members of the demon god clan who were standing close to the shattered void were directly torn apart by the force of the void. Even Ao Feng was taken aback by what he saw. Before coming here, he had used the Holy Sword domain to seal the space. Even if the sword energy rushed out of the Holy Sword domain, it would not break the space. Moreover, this palace itself was a kind of Dharma artifact. To break the space, it also had to break the Dharma artifact. All these abnormalities made Ao Feng's expression turn serious. Kang Xinmu was also shocked by the scene in front of him. His eyes narrowed, and the 7 devouring demon sealing art quietly lit up. The shattered space in front of him was indeed the void of the outside world. The grey shadow that swept out from it was also the power of the void storm. The power of the void storm was also a kind of natural power. However, there were very few people who cultivated the power of the void storm. After all, this kind of natural power was very difficult to control. Moreover, Kang Xinmu's eyes were condensed with the 7 devouring demon sealing art, and he could clearly see the essence of the void storm power. This kind of power clearly exceeded the scope of the supreme divine power. Seeing the void storm power surging over, Kang Xinmu hurriedly dodged. Kang Xinmu had seen the destructive power of the void storm power. Everywhere it passed, no one was left alive. However, what shocked Kang Xinmu was the long sword in Ao Feng's hand. Just now, a void storm power swept towards Ao Feng, but Ao Feng used his long sword to split the void storm power apart. After clashing with the void storm power, Ao Feng's long sword actually did not leave a single mark. The long sword looked like an ordinary sword. If there was anything special about it, it would be that the runes carved on the tip of the sword were more complicated. That's right, the runes. Just now, when the 7 devouring demon sealing art quietly activated, Kang Xinmu caught a glimpse of the runes on the tip of the long sword in Ao Feng's hand. That rune was somewhat similar to the runes on the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Moreover, when the 7 devouring demon sealing art was activated and Kang Xinmu sized up the long sword, Ao Feng seemed to have sensed something and looked over. A cold glint flashed across his deep eyes, and the meaning behind it was unclear. Kang Xinmu could not help but be suspicious. Could it be that Ao Feng has one of the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art? According to the 7 devouring demon sealing art, the 7 devouring demon sealing art eventually turned into 8 fragments. Other than the core engraving that he had, there were 7 other fragments. This time, all the cultivators who came to the ancient desolate city came for a fragment of the ancient desolate city. Could it be that Ao Feng had already obtained this fragment? The reason why Jiang Shenwu was certain that Ao Feng did not possess the fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art was because Jiang Shenwu knew from the 7 devouring demon sealing art's inscription that the inscription was the first of the 8 fragments to appear. The fragment in the ancient desolate city could be considered the second one. Looking at Kang Xinmu's eyes, Ao Feng's expression turned serious. The look in Kang Xinmu's eyes made him very unhappy. What was even more strange was that the feeling that Kang Xinmu gave him was different from when he was at the city gate. From head to toe, he gave off a feeling that he did not belong in this place. When the void storm energy approached Kang Xinmu, there seemed to be a faint white mist emerging from his body, but it quickly disappeared. That power did not seem to be the power of the supreme divine fire. Chapter 56-41. The raging void storm energy destroyed this space. This also allowed Jiang Shenwu to discover that it was Ao Feng's doing that had sealed off the surrounding space. Now that the space shackles were broken, Kang Xinmu was no longer restrained. However, facing his benefactor, Kang Xinmu felt a headache coming on. The void storm's attack was aimless, and there was no way to predict its trajectory. One moment it was in front of him, the next moment it could be behind him or close in on him. Kang Xinmu could barely hold on with his black dragon scales, but Moya could not. He hurried to Moya's side and took her away. After the two of them flew out, the white mist followed closely behind them. Soon, the destroyed space was occupied by waves of white mist. Kong Shinmu, do you think you can escape? Ao Feng clearly would not let Kong Shinmu off so easily. To him, sealing the space was a simple matter. Ao Feng leaped into the air with the tip of his foot. As he dodged the Void Storm's attack, he waved the sword in his hand. On the blade of the long sword, one black and one white, the power of lightning appeared again. The two powers gathered together and abruptly appeared before Jiang Shenwu and Emoya. They abruptly formed a four-sided prison, trapping the two of them once again. Ao Feng's figure followed closely behind. The powerful holy sword's power turned into countless sword chi and attacked Kong Shinmu and Emoya with an unstoppable force. Kong Shinmu's supreme mystical fire's power had become more refined after a few battles. Against the powerful holy sword's power, the supreme mystical fire's power was obviously not enough. Being trapped in the Dharma treasure, Kong Shinmu could not gather the power of fire from the outside. He could only use his own power to resist. For a short period of time, the supreme mystical fire's power played a role in defense. But as time dragged on, the supreme mystical fire's power was quickly defeated. Especially the prison that Ao Feng had sealed up was a sword chi domain. Kong Shinmu was unable to break the sword chi domain. Being in the sword chi domain, he was unable to unleash his full strength, and could only passively defend. Senior Moya, I'll have to trouble you to stand behind me. Kong Shinmu's brows were tightly furrowed and his expression was solemn, but when he spoke to Emoya, his tone was very relaxed. What are you going to do? Emoya's beautiful eyes landed on Kong Shinmu. Her tone was no longer as gentle as before. Instead, it carried a trace of coldness. Don't worry. My skin is thick. It won't be a problem for me to block some sword beams. Kong Shinmu was glad that he had refined the pitch-black dragon scales earlier. Be careful to avoid the power of the nether storm, Moya said gently. Kong Shinmu nodded. Just as he said he would, the power of the void storm quickly swept over. Not only did it destroy the prison formed by Ao Feng's sword chi domain, it also dissolved the power of Ao Feng's holy sword. Taking advantage of this gap, Kong Shinmu broke free from the sword chi domain and unleashed his supreme divine fire domain. Since there was no power of fire here, he would create his own power of fire. This was the first time Kong Shinmu tried to use the supreme divine fire to create his own power of fire, and the result was a pleasant surprise. A scarlet flame swept over from the side and floated in front of Kong Shinmu. Vermilion bird flame. Kong Shinmu was overjoyed. It was actually the power of vermilion bird flame. That wasn't all. There was also a green flame and a milky white flame. Kong Shinmu recognized these two types of power of fire. The green flame was the supreme nether flame. That white flame power was the supreme heavenly flame. If there was only the power of vermilion bird flame, Kong Shinmu would have thought that it was his own power of fire. But since the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame appeared, it was definitely not his own power of fire. The supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame were both power of nature. This kind of power could only be subdued and not created. Kong Shinmu was also very surprised. This palace actually had the power of fire such as the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame. However, Kong Shinmu soon discovered that the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame that appeared in his supreme divine fire domain were not the power of fire from the palace. Apart from the power of vermilion bird flame, the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame were too heterogeneous. It also carried the power of other flames, as well as the extremely weak power of the five elements. It even carried some miscellaneous supreme martial skills. These supreme martial skills were all different, and they clearly did not come from the same cultivator. This was enough to prove that the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame came from outside the palace. From the looks of it, the formation that appeared in the palace did not close the palace doors after bringing the cultivator inside. Since that was the case, he could summon more power of fire. Kang Xinmu focused his mind and summoned the power of fire again. At this time, Xiaofan was already in the range of Kang Xinmu's supreme divine fire domain. First, he was surrounded by the power of vermilion bird flame, then the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame attacked him at the same time. Even if you summon all the fire in the world, it will be useless. This was Xiaofang's confidence in his supreme holy sword. Just as he said, he quickly destroyed the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame that Kang Xinmu summoned. The attack was so fast that Kang Xinmu did not even have time to absorb the power of fire. The power of fire was instantly destroyed. Kang Xinmu reacted quickly and absorbed the power of vermilion bird flame. The power of vermilion bird flame was naturally not as strong as the supreme nether flame and supreme heavenly flame. However, for Kang Xinmu's power of fire, it was more than enough. After absorbing the power of vermilion bird flame, the supreme divine fire was strengthened. This time, Kang Xinmu did not defend passively. He used his devouring power to take the initiative to fight against Xiaofang's sword energy. Xiaofang used hundreds and thousands of sword energy. The number of sword energy that could be counted on one hand were black and white sword energy images that looked like the kun. The pressure that these sword energy images gave Kang Xinmu was much heavier than the other sword energy images. Kang Xinmu gathered all his power to resist the sword energy images. When the two sides collided, Kang Xinmu could clearly feel the pressure. There was also a part of the sword energy images that pierced through his power and penetrated the black dragon scales. Kang Xinmu instinctively gathered the power in his body and locked this foreign energy. However, what surprised Kang Xinmu was that the moment this foreign energy was locked, it disappeared. It was as if it had fused with his power. However, there was no change in his body. Kang Xinmu thought that his devouring power had devoured this foreign energy. Xiaofang understood Kang Xinmu's power very well. He knew that Kang Xinmu had relied on his devouring power to barge into the dragon demon cave. It was also at that time that Kang Xinmu had devoured the supreme divine power and entered the supreme divine realm. However, this was, after all, a power that was devoured. Without steady comprehension, he would not be able to achieve anything great. Xiaofang continued to control the power of the holy sword. In an instant, the sword energy images that Kang Xinmu had blocked condensed again. Looking at the sword energy images in front of him, Kang Xinmu's eyes narrowed. These sword energy images were sword energy refined from the power of the supreme divine sword. It could also be understood as a supreme martial technique. Chapter 56-42. Rather than saying that the sword qi that Kang Xinmu had dissolved reappeared, it was more accurate to say that Xiaofang had once again executed a peerless martial technique. The sword qi that was surrounded by black and white lightning pierced through the peerless divine fire and arrived in front of Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu had not comprehended the peerless dragon martial technique yet. He was only relying on his divine strength to deal with Xiaofang's peerless sword qi. Immediately, he released the devouring power that was refined by the 7 devouring demon sealing art. The devouring power instantly surrounded the several supreme sword qi martial skills that were coming at him. However, compared to the speed at which the devouring power devoured the peerless sword qi martial technique, the peerless sword qi martial technique was much faster. At this point, Kang Xinmu could no longer avoid it. He could only face it head-on. It was very difficult for the devouring power to devour the peerless sword qi martial technique. However, if he had the help of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, he would definitely be able to devour the peerless sword qi martial technique. The core engraving of the 7 devouring devil sealing art fragment that had fused with Jiang Shenwu's eyes, Jiang Shenwu was unable to open it as he pleased. However, he could not care so much at this point. If he could not open the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment, he would most likely die. If he died, the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment would be buried in the darkness once again. As Kang Shinmu thought so, he silently recited the incantation to open the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. The 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment seemed to have sensed Kang Shinmu's thoughts, and it suddenly opened. Whoosh! In that instant, a strong gust of wind blew past, and Kang Shinmu felt a stinging pain on his face. Following which, the devouring power that had turned into a storm suddenly expanded. Wherever the devouring power went, not only the peerless sword chi martial technique, but also the countless other sword chi were all devoured. After devouring the peerless sword chi martial technique, Kang Shinmu also comprehended the nature of the peerless sword martial technique. He did not cultivate sword intent, but he merged the peerless sword chi martial technique into the dragon martial technique. The dragon martial skill was tempered by the supreme sword chi martial skill, and finally became a supreme dragon martial skill. Aofeng did not know when Kang Shinmu's devouring power had become so strong that it could even devour his supreme sword chi martial skill. He only noticed that there was something wrong with Kang Shinmu's eyes. That pair of deep eyes contained a dark light. It was clearly a mark. The mark that existed in Kang Shinmu's eyes was not complete. In fact, it was only an extremely small part of it. Even though it was only a small part, the strokes were very superficial. Aofeng suddenly thought of something. He looked at the long sword in his hand and his eyes narrowed. The rune markings in Kang Shinmu's eyes were very similar to the rune markings on his saber. He'd obtained this sword from a ruin in the Outerium. The ruins were suspected to be the battlefield between the ancient martial kingdom and the 10,000 Gu kingdom. The runes on the sword were written in the language of the ancient martial kingdom. Furthermore, the runes were written by the first owner of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, Feng. Could it be that Kang Shinmu had already obtained the ancient desolate city's 7 devouring demon sealing art? So he had something to rely on. No wonder he was so arrogant. Even though Kang Shinmu's supreme dragon martial skill was able to block Aofeng's supreme sword chi martial skill, he could not relax at all. When the 7 devouring demon sealing art was activated, he could see many details with his eyes that he could only sense with his soul consciousness. It was not an exaggeration to say that Aofeng's every move was under Kang Shinmu's control. With this, Kang Shinmu's supreme dragon martial skill barely gained the upper hand. Even so, Kang Shinmu was still unable to suppress Aofeng. On the other hand, Aofeng, who had the supreme sword chi martial skill, became more and more courageous. He gradually understood Kang Shinmu's supreme dragon martial skill, and once again suppressed Kang Shinmu. But Aofeng could only suppress Kang Shinmu, and he was unable to take down Kang Shinmu in one move. Furthermore, Kang Shinmu was always able to avoid fatal attacks. Can you see through my moves? Aofeng's eyes narrowed as he pondered over the mark that flashed across Kang Shinmu's eyes. That mark seemed to be able to see the trajectory of his supreme sword chi martial skill. I have to say that the thing in your eyes is quite powerful. But, this is not enough. You cannot escape. As Aofeng finished speaking, a hexagram sword array appeared around Kang Shinmu. The moment the hexagram sword array appeared, Kang Shinmu's body stiffened, and his movements became sluggish. The supreme sword chi martial skill produced by the hexagram sword array attacked Kang Shinmu relentlessly. Kang Shinmu activated the extreme 10-directional devil seal, and the 9 seals of the extreme 10-directional devil seal flew out and collided with the supreme sword chi martial skill. The instant the two forces collided, the surrounding space was shaken and torn apart. The moment the void storm from the side attacked, it tore apart the fragile space. Another void storm came from the void. Kang Shinmu quickly broke through the hexagram sword array and descended. The void storm that came from the side suddenly attacked. It brushed past Kong Shinmu's body and reached Ao Feng. Ao Feng was only slightly touched by the void storm, and his left arm was twisted and deformed. The void storm contained an unknown power, and it directly entered Ao Feng's body through his left arm. In order to protect his body, Ao Feng decisively chopped off his left arm. While he was down, I will take his life. Kong Shinmu took advantage of the fact that Ao Feng was distracted, and Kong Shinmu took the opportunity to chase after him. The 9 seals of the extreme 10-directional devil seal landed on Ao Feng's body. Ao Feng wanted to use the supreme sword chi domain to dissolve the 9 seals of the extreme 10-directional devil seal. However, the speed of the 9 seals was faster than the void storm. In the end, Ao Feng couldn't dodge it, and his body fell to the ground, falling into the hexagram sword array. At this moment, Ao Feng's body was covered in injuries, and his body was covered in blood. His aura was so weak that it was almost undetectable. Kong Shinmu heaved a sigh of relief and prepared to deal another fatal blow to Ao Feng. It was this short span of time that led to a disaster. Ao Feng's aura, which had disappeared, suddenly grew stronger. The intensity of his aura reached a terrifying level, and it could even resist the void storm. Ao Feng was going to self-destruct. Ao Feng was different from Ao Tong. It could be said that their strength was not on the same level. Compared to Ao Tong, who had abandoned his soul and consciousness to form a puppet, Ao Feng's self-destruction would definitely have a serious impact on this space. No, not only this space. If that happened, even the palace would be destroyed. The intensity of this power was not something that the current Kong Shinmu could resist. Of course, he didn't have the guts to resist. If he wasn't careful, he would be blown to smithereens. Senior Amoya, let's go out first. Kong Shinmu determined the exit of the palace based on the source of the Supreme Underworld Flame and Supreme Heavenly Flame. He brought Amoya and headed for the exit. However, there was nothing at the place where the exit was supposed to be. Not only that, the entire space started to shake violently. At the same time, a white fog suddenly appeared. Following which, a black lightning bolt appeared above the palace, penetrated the entire palace, and landed beside Kong Shinmu and Amoya. The moment this black lightning bolt appeared, the second seal of the 7 devouring demon sealing art in Kong Shinmu's eyes lit up. Chapter 56-43. Kong Shinmu stared at the black thunderbolt in front of him. The black thunderbolt fell from the sky and stopped in this space. The aura that leaked out from it caused the air to tremble. Because of the appearance of this black thunderbolt, more and more cultivators gathered around. Kong Shinmu could clearly feel the changes in the 7 devouring demon sealing art, but he knew that this was not a place to stay for long. With Ao Feng's strength, if he self-destructed, the entire palace would be destroyed. At that time, the powerful energy produced by the explosion would affect all the cultivators who entered the palace. Senior, follow me. The 7 devouring demon sealing art lit up completely, and Kong Shinmu could clearly see the changes in the air flow in the surrounding space. With the appearance of the black thunderbolt, the energy in the surrounding space surged rapidly. The derivative Dharma treasures in the palace were also gathering in this direction. But there was one place that was very special. That was the direction where Ao Feng self-destructed. Just now, Kong Shinmu used the power of the void storm to defeat Ao Feng. Ao Feng used the most extreme method to drag Kong Shinmu down with him. Originally, Kong Shinmu and Amoya had come here to avoid Ao Feng's self-destruction. They did not expect that the exit of the palace would be closed. Not only that, the energy in the entire palace was gathering. At this time, the space where Ao Feng self-destructed was the calmest. Jiang Shenwu, have you discovered anything unusual about that black thunderbolt? Amoya's beautiful eyes glanced at the black thunderbolt that had penetrated most of the space as she asked in a gentle voice. It has the power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment, but it is not the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. Kang Xinmu was very sure. At first glance, this black thunderbolt indeed looked like the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. But Kang Xinmu, who had the core inscription of the 7 devouring demon sealing art, could clearly identify the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment. Looking at the aura emitted by this black thunderbolt and the patterns on its body, it seemed that someone had transferred the power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art fragment over. It couldn't be said that this was a fake fragment of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. It could only be said to have obtained a portion of the 7 devouring demon sealing art's power. Now that this power had appeared, it gathered all the power in this palace. At this rate, the true fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art would be drawn out sooner or later. Do you still remember that after you entered the ancient desolate city, you mentioned that you have a connection with the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art? Mo Yawan Judo. Yes, there was a certain connection when we first came in, and the location wasn't here. Kang Xinmu still remembered that direction. Perhaps that's where the true fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art is located, Mo Yat said softly. Senior, you're right, but we can't get out now, Kang Xinmu said helplessly. All the cultivators who entered the palace knew that this palace was an artifact. But who would have thought that this mystic treasure would close its entrance on its own? Now that the mystic treasure's aura was so unstable, other than being affected by the black lightning, it was also because of Ao Feng's self-destruction. Let's not talk about whether the black lightning would be able to break this mystic treasure. With Ao Feng's desperate attack, it would definitely be able to destroy this mystic treasure. Of course, unless this mystic treasure was a heavenly saint item. Kang Xinmu suddenly thought of something and looked at the surrounding space. The surging aura had already started to expand. Kang Xinmu looked at Mo Ya and saw that Mo Ya's beautiful eyes were staring in one direction. That direction was where they had planned to go previously, and it was highly possible that it was where the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art was. Senior Mo Ya, we are unable to leave this mystic treasure space, so we can't go over to investigate. Compared to this, Kang Xinmu had a bad premonition. The sudden appearance of the black lightning was obviously to attract the true fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art. Ever since the mysterious black lightning appeared, it had been there. It was to attract the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art to this place. If it was just to make the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art appear, they only needed to break the seal. Every cultivator who came to the ancient desolation ancient city had this ability. However, the reality was that the owner of the palace had paid a price to attract the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art. Could it be that the owner of the palace had already made arrangements to destroy the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art? After all, this palace was a heavenly saint item. It was completely possible for it to destroy the fragment of the 7 devouring devil sealing art. This question was quickly verified. They're here. Mo Ya's soft voice sounded. Jiang Shenwu heard the voice and looked over, only to see densely packed figures surging over from the white fog. Those figures all had unfamiliar faces, but their clothes were very uniform. It was the uniform of General Leng Changhong subordinates. To be exact, this large group was the Ancient Desolation Ancient Cities patrol team. After this patrol team appeared, they went straight towards the black lightning. As soon as they came into contact with the black lightning, they all disappeared one by one. No, they did not disappear. Instead, the man-eating parasitic insects that made them turned into streams of blood qi and merged with the black lightning. As the blood qi continued to flow into the black lightning started to turn blood red. At the same time, a dangerous force was gradually born. Kang Xinmu suddenly felt a sharp pain in his eyes. That extremely dangerous force suddenly attacked him. Senior, let's go. Kong Shinmu and Amoya left the Black Lightning and came to the place where he fought with Ao Feng. There were even more cultivators gathered here than at the Black Thunderbolt's side. Everyone, be careful. The Black Lightning is accumulating energy. No one knew which cultivator shouted. More and more cultivators came in the direction of Kong Shinmu. Ao Feng, Ao Feng. Aoe, the demon god race's clan leader, also came from the side. When he saw that Kong Shinmu was safe and sound, he became even more furious. Aoe knew that Ao Feng was very strong. Ao Feng's understanding of the supreme sword chi and divine power far surpassed his own. However, Ao Feng had a fatal weakness, which was that he was too stubborn. Victory and defeat were often decided in an instant. Those who were too stubborn could very likely lose. Kong Shinmu was cunning, and many experts had fallen in his hands. Unexpectedly, even Ao Feng was not spared. Aoye's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. He clenched his fists, and waves of black chi were emitted from his hands, spreading towards Kong Shinmu. You can't even protect yourself, and you still have the mood to fight? Is everyone from the demon god race to the clan leader so reckless? Tang Xiaoyu, who had a bright smile on his face, appeared from the side and stood between Aoe and Kong Shinmu. Who are you? Aoe glanced at Tang Xiaoyu and said coldly. I am not a thing. My name is Tang Xiaoyu. Tang Xiaoyu suddenly felt that something was wrong. However, he couldn't figure out what was wrong. Chapter 56-44. Tang Xiaoyu's words stunned not only Aoe, but even Kong Shinmu was slightly startled. What shocked Kong Shinmu was that Tang Xiaoyu and Gu Feng had clearly left the range of the palace's array formation. Why did he appear in the palace now? Did he use the manifestation origin stacking technique to enter? Brother Jiang, I just heard from that crazy woman that this palace is comparable to a sacred grade magic tool. In order to see his idol, Tang Xiaoyu thought about it and decided to build a good relationship with Kong Shinmu first. It is a magic tool personally refined by the ancient Desolation City Lord. Although its quality is not at the level of a sacred grade magic tool, the materials were collected by the City Lord during his journey. That black thunderbolt is the core of the magic tool. Tang Xiaoyu did not hide anything and told Kong Shinmu everything he knew. Of course, most of the cultivators present might have already learned about this information after entering the magic tool. However, there was one thing that most of the people present did not know. The existence of this magic tool was not to store the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing technique, but to destroy the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing technique. The city lord of the ancient Desolation City was also the ancient martial country's general Leng Zhonghong, who mysteriously disappeared. The ancient martial country lost Leng Zhonghong and was already in a weak position, so they were destroyed by the 10,000 Gu country. Leng Zhonghong later obtained some mysterious power and appeared in the 10,000 Gu country. He destroyed the 10,000 Gu country with his own strength. However, he also paid a price for this and became neither human nor demon. Later, it was said that General Leng Zhonghong could not control his inner demons and committed suicide. Many years later, the story of the 7 devouring demon sealing technique spread throughout the world. There were all sorts of rumors about the 7 devouring demon sealing technique, but no one who actually came into contact with the 7 devouring demon sealing technique had ever appeared. It was not that the 7 devouring demon sealing technique was too mysterious, but those who possessed the 7 devouring demon sealing technique mostly ended up like Leng Zhonghong. Up until now, probably only Feng had possessed the 7 devouring demon sealing technique and was not affected. There was a very prominent record that stated that Feng was the first owner of the 7 devouring demon sealing technique, and it was also Feng who personally sealed it. Combining all of these events, the mysterious power that General Leng Zhonghong obtained back then was the newly discovered 7 devouring demon sealing art. He was unable to control the power of the 7 devouring demons' sealing art, which was why he suffered the backlash. Leng Zhanghong's obsession remained in the ancient desolate city, and he was determined to destroy the 7 devouring devils' sealing art. Thus, in this city, he forged this magic tool, Meteor, in order to destroy the 7 devouring devils' sealing art. However, the 7 devouring demon sealing art that was left behind was incomplete. There was only one fragment of the ancient desolate city. That black bolt of lightning was the core of the destruction. Leng Zhanghong originally wanted to use annihilation to draw the remaining fragments of the 7 devouring devils' sealing art, but there were too many unforeseen events. In the end, the ancient desolate city fell into the moving secret realm. That was the appearance it was showing now. The sealed mystic realm was an unknown variable in Leng Zhanghong's plan to destroy the 7 devouring demon sealing art. Of course, due to the influence of the sealed mystic realm, more cultivators would come to the ancient desolate city. To General Leng Zhanghong, it was a material to refine annihilation. Whether it was the cultivators who entered the sealed mystic realm in the beginning, or the cultivators who entered the sealed mystic realm now, most of them would go to the ancient desolate city for the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. The price was to be eaten by the puppet parasite, and become a puppet. In the end, it became part of the power of the destruction. Now that the power of the destruction was basically complete, it was enough to destroy the fragments of the 7 devouring demon sealing art. If they didn't leave this palace in time, it would be bad. Brother Jiang, that's the situation. Tang Xiaoyu's tone was very sincere. Now that the destruction magic tool is about to explode, we have to leave as soon as possible. With the 10,000 elephants essence superposition technique, he could send Kong Xinmu out of here. Suddenly, Tang Xiaoyu glanced at Emoya, who was at the side, and his expression suddenly froze. The destruction magic tool had already closed all the entrances and exits, and using the 10,000 elephants essence superposition technique could bring people out. With his current ability, he could only bring one person at a time. Emoya understood tacitly and instantly saw through the problem Tang Xiaoyu was facing. In addition, she was also afraid that Kong Xinmu would be too impulsive and go head-on against the destruction magic tool, so she chose to let Tang Xiaoyu bring Kong Xinmu out first. Kong Xinmu, I'll cover you guys to leave this place. Emoya smiled and spoke in a gentle voice. No. Kong Xinmu was the first to disagree. Seeing that the two of them were suddenly being modest, Tang Xiaoyu was a little anxious. Brother Jiang, time is pressing, we won't make it. Please bring the senior out first. Kong Xinmu placed a hand on Tang Xiaoyu's shoulder and said firmly. After saying that, he took a few steps to the side. Kong Xinmu. Emoya's delicate brows slightly furrowed. She knew that Kong Xinmu was very talented, and his ability to understand things was also extraordinary. However, Kong Xinmu's biggest weakness was that he did things without consideration. His understanding of supreme divine power was not enough to withstand the power brought by the destruction of a heaven and earth holy grade magic tool. For the first time, Kong Xinmu ignored Senior Emoya's call. Compared to him, Senior Emoya needed to leave the destruction more. His skin was rough and thick, so it was not a big problem for him to be blasted by the destruction. Senior, please excuse me. When Tang Xiaoyu heard Kong Xinmu call Emoya Senior, he felt respect for her from the bottom of his heart, and his words and actions were very humble. Emoya's delicate brows were tightly furrowed, and her pair of beautiful eyes fell on Kong Xinmu, unwilling to move away. In terms of personal considerations, Tang Xiaoyu would definitely protect Kong Xinmu first. As long as Kong Xinmu was safe, he would have the chance to see his idol. However, to Kong Xinmu, this Senior Emoya was clearly more important. Tang Xiaoyu did not delay at all, and he nimbly executed the 10,000 elephants origin superimposition technique, sending Emoya out. Senior, please wait here for a moment. Tang Xiaoyu hurriedly instructed before he executed the 10,000 elephants origin superimposition technique again. However, in the next moment, Tang Xiaoyu's expression turned ugly. The destruction was activated. The destruction was a Dharma artifact, and even though it had its own space inside, it was still a Dharma artifact in essence. Now that the destruction had been activated, the space inside had been torn apart, and there was no way to find Kang Xinmu's exact location. Kang Xinmu had already expected this outcome. Now, he was only glad that Senior Amoya had left the destruction. The destruction was activated, and the white fog inside it surged even more violently. Of course, there was still a powerful force that could not be ignored. That was the force produced by Ao Feng's self-destruction. This force gradually formed a vortex, and it actually went against the black lightning force. Coupled with the void storm force that surged out from the torn space, the three forces fought against each other. Facing these three forces, none of the cultivators present dared to underestimate them. The only person who was calm now was probably Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu used the power of the seven devouring demon sealing art to nimbly avoid the attacks of the three forces. He found a relatively safe place, and his body was surrounded by white fog. Kang Xinmu simply sat down, focused his mind, and meditated.